Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, selamat pagi and good morning from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. On behalf of ISIS Malaysia and PCC, we welcome you back to the 27th PCC General Meeting. This event highlights the theme of optimizing human potential towards a future of shared prosperity and sustainability in the times of COVID-19. My name is Muhammad Sinatra, an analyst from ISIS Malaysia, and I will be your MC for today's proceedings. A quick reminder to those on Zoom platform, please turn off your camera and audio during the sessions to ensure clarity of bandwidth for our online presenters. For those who wish to pose questions to panelists, you may place your questions in the Q&A space. In today's sessions, we will discuss a variety of important issues, including unemployment, digital economy, as well as small and medium enterprises. We will start the day with a session on youth and jobless, facing youth unemployment in the Asia Pacific. It is my pleasure to invite His Excellency Ambassador Sergio Lee Lopez to navigate the session. Ambassador, the space is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinatra. Thank you very much to all of you for attending this session. I think it's a very important session because this is a pressing matter. The fact that already occupies this panel in this morning. Youth labor markets are suffering a twin shock as a result of the coronavirus disease, COVID-19 pandemic. The construction and business activity has cut into employment on the demand side, while reduced access to education and training has impacted the supply side. The massive job disruption is affecting almost everyone within 15 to 24 years old workers, losing jobs at a faster rate than adults and subject to worsening conditions in the labor market. Given the current situation, the youth will likely be greater long-term economic and social costs that will heighten intergenerational poverty and inequality. Government needs to provide large-scale integrated measures that can fuel a jobs-rich regrowth for the benefit of all. Wage subsidy programs, job creation, job search assistance, expanded training programs, and access to entrepreneurship could be implemented to tackle the youth employment crisis. 4 in 5 young workers in the region were engaged in informal employment, a higher share than among adults, and 1 in 4 young workers were living in conditions of extreme or moderate poverty. On the onset of the crisis, nearly half of young workers in the region were employed in the 4 sectors destined to be hardest hit by the recession. And these sectors, wholesale and retail trade and repair, manufacturing, rental and business services, and accommodation and food services, employed nearly half of all young people working in Asia Pacific at the onset of the crisis. Young women were overrepresented in 3 of the 4 highly impacted sectors, particularly accommodation and food services. Pre-existing vulnerabilities of youth in the labor market will be exacerbated with negative consequences. The scale of the impact will depend on the length of the crisis, the choices government make for socioeconomic recovery, and the capacity of institutions to implement effective measures. The vulnerability of youth in labor market was already visible in the first half of this year as the COVID-19 crisis unfolded. Youth unemployment rates jumped in the first quarter of 2020 from the last quarter of 2019 in all economies for which data is available. Compared with the first quarter of 2019, youth unemployment rate increased in 6 of 9 economies that have quarterly data available, 6 of major economies as Australia, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Vietnam, as well as in Hong Kong, which showed the largest increase of 3 percentage points. All economies that experienced increases showed sharper jumps in youth rates than in adult rates. For the global travel and tourism industry, employment losses are expected to top 100 million jobs this year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with the Asia-Pacific market likely to see the biggest decline of approximately 63 million jobs. 42% of workers in Asia aged 18 to 29 have experienced a fall in income since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. All the data mentioned above are contained in a report elaborated by the International Labour Organization and the Asian Development Bank. I am certain that our panelists will go further and deeper in details on the consequences of this crisis affecting a whole generation. In the other side of the Pacific Ocean, the panorama is not rosier. The COVID-19 pandemic had badly affected group young workers in economies like Peru and Mexico that have a huge hospitality industry that came to a visual halt due to the sanitary crisis, and the government do not have the resources to rescue the industry and the workers. We have today a group of 3 distinguished panelists who will talk and go deeper in the subject. The first to take the floor is Dr. Tan Ki Yap, Chair of PECC and Associate Professor of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, followed by Mrs. Shanti Jagannathan, Principal Education Specialist in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of the Asia Development Bank. Last but not least, Mr. Felix Weidenkaft, Employment Specialist of the International Labour Organization based in Bangkok. I will permit myself, before the presentations, to ask our 3 distinguished panelists the 3 following questions. Dr. Tan, as chair of PECC, what would you advise the Singaporean government to address the dire conditions of a whole generation of workers? Mrs. Shanti Jagannathan, as Principal Education Specialist, the leaders of the region come to you for advice on programs to better educate young workers to face the challenges of the future. What are your plans for the present and for the post-COVID-19 world? Felix, as a high official of the International Labour Organization, are aware that this situation is not limited to the Asia-Pacific region, but it is a phenomenon that afflicts all over the world, rich, developing, and poor countries. What will be your advice to institutions and labor unions of the regions to face those pressing problems? Thank you very much. Dr. Tan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
You can hear me, Ambassador? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And let me see. Now my PowerPoint is not up to.
Mr. Tan Ki Yap, do you want us
Yep.
to enable you to
Yes.
share the screen?
Yes, please. And then pass the host to me, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I will go very quickly in 10 minutes to share with everybody about the unemployment in the Asia Pacific. And I think we are not just talking about the youth. I think it is equally painful for any citizen to be unemployed. So I'm addressing for all ages potential unemployment, especially in this part of the world. Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk about why employment creation is a new approach to economy upgrading, because all these public policies, if they cannot create meaningful employment, and it's not going to help. And we want to infer the global trends in economic restructuring, sunset industry, job losses observed from the US economy, so that we can perhaps have a glimpse of hope to see how jobs can be migrating to developing economies. Then I wanted to talk about the role of Singapore government in helping workers to prepare, and then I talk about why public goods is important in a knowledge-based economy, and how, as the Asia-Pacific community, we can work together, especially in a post-pandemic COVID-19, towards a digitalized new economy. Now, on the next slide, yes. Now, I think we have witnessed the world from synchronized global growth to synchronized global slowdown. And I think the worst is yet to be, because it's made complicated by the COVID-19, which remain to be very difficult for Western economies and also some Asian economies. And I think unemployment and income disparity is going to get worse, because there's this danger of trade protectionism and unequal distribution of fruits from globalization. So I think eventually economies and government officials have realized that government have an important role. The market itself is imperfect. So this is the debate about visible hands versus invisible hands. And I think it is important when we talk about unemployment across all ages, we have to address globalization and its discontent. We have to discourage protectionism. We have to try to mitigate the digital divide. We have to absolutely oppose unilateralism and jingoism, which is what we're seeing now. Let me go to the next slide. Now, then I think we look at the 16 top industries for job losses forecasted between 2016 to 2026. I believe the US Labor Bureau did this before the pandemic, but I think it is still relevant. So we can look at how which are these 16 industries, and we can look at how the diminishing jobs, occupations, due to various reasons like outsourcing to overseas market where labor is cheap, enhancement in information technology to replace the need for workers, the emergence of gig economy, and also increase in part-time and freelance workers filling what was once a full-time job. So these are very relevant. By looking at the 20 fastest declining occupation in the US economy, we can also infer what the job market is going to be like. Let me go to the next slide. Yes, and you can see that these are the top industries, and there is a tremendous changes in terms of the manual operation job, whether it's in computer, whether it's in manufacturing, and I think in word processors, various electronic equipment repairs for motor vehicles, which is the reason why we are seeing automation. They replace some of the jobs. But then let's come and look at the kind of diminishing occupation in the next slide. Can you move the next slide? I can't move from here. Okay, now you can see that these are the declining occupations: postal mail service, printings, apparel manufacturing, plastic products, communication equipment, and all kinds. So, but I think today the objective is not to analyze where the job loss and where are the industries are sunsetting, but what is most important is what is the role of the government in doing something to help or to mitigate this unemployment issue. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now, so in Singapore, government is constantly promoting productivity drive through investing in new skills at all ages in order to stay current. So I just want to share with you, and these are the various initiatives by the Singapore government. But before, I must make a qualification. A lot of things done by the Singapore government, they are not exactly new. But the difference is, when you do these policies, are they effective in the implementation? And the second point I would like to make is all these policy initiatives to invest in new skills in order to stay current, to prepare for new jobs rather than to save jobs, because some jobs cannot be saved. But the important point is all this initiative needs money. If the government do not have sound budgeting, they will go into the catch-22 situations. They don't have the money to create, to upgrade skills. They don't have the resources to prepare for new jobs. As a result, the economy becomes irrelevant, unemployment becomes worse, and the budget condition worsen also. So Ministry of Manpower, you can see, emphasize on the skill gaps for new jobs for professional, managers, executive, and technician. This is important because it gives confidence to new hires and trainees. And they provide job growth scheme, Singapore United traineeship, mid-career pathway programs, and professional conversion plans. Now, I know if you are young, when you're unemployed, it's painful. But if you're an adult, you have family commitments, you have housing commitments, you have healthcare, all kinds of commitments. And if you're unemployed, I think the sky fall over you. I think that is very sad. So we cannot underestimate the pain of unemployment. So Ministry of Finance Singapore allocated fiscal support for job credit scheme, wage credit scheme, workforce income supplements, COVID-19 support grants, workfare special income earners. These are simply transfers. Transfers not to pay for unemployment, but transfer to support employment. That's the difference. Eh? In Singapore, we don't pay unemployment benefit, but we pay using the fiscal resources to support employment, to help employers if the wage is too high, to help them to keep the job, to help the low-income earners. And Ministry of Trade Industry actively participate in regional and bilateral free trade agreement in order to improve trade connectivity and regional economic integration. Now, if you don't go on that, I suppose it's very difficult. Now that you have COVID-19, Ministry of Transport is very actively trying to revitalize the connectivities. Connectivities due to COVID-19, try to do a lot of things to get the economy restarted. And I go to the next slide. And now, in particular, I think this is more interesting. Ministry of Education, we are investing in new skills at all ages to stay current. So firstly, you can see that we emphasize in our university curriculum, we review them from university, polytechnic to Institute of Technical Education. It has to be industrial apprenticeship, which I think is most important. This is basically a German model, industrial apprenticeship program where students will spend times in companies for apprenticeship. Then we emphasize a multidisciplinary approach and lifelong learning programs. So we are moving away from overly emphasized on academic to Institute of Technical Education and vocational planning. And you'll be surprised, we think that our Institute of Technical Education is a jewel in the Singapore's education system. Much as our university was ranked high places in the world, but I think we take the Institute of Technical Education as an important point for making our society more inclusive, making our workers more relevant. So there are four strategies in particular, and I must emphasize, in particular to disadvantaged students, not young students, but in particular disadvantaged students. We invest in them to very early to even out the differences in life, giving them full access to appropriate health, learning and development support. That's very important. You have to even out their differences early in life. The second strategy, that to ensure institutions have or continue to build a multiple pathway for students to have their career and how they can be developed, because every child is unique and we need difference in approaches to help them to grow and learn. And number three, to ensure students develop attitude and skill beyond the book knowledge. You know, I went to many developing countries. I look at the curriculum, they were teaching the same curriculum year in, year out, just from the book, and which could be obsolete. So we are saying that you must develop the attitudes and the skill beyond the book knowledge, where you emphasize on competitive advantage and human strengths. So educators, you must make sure that our students have competency, including core value like respect and resilience, and skill set like critical thinking, right? So the fourth strategy is that we push for more interdisciplinary learning to support career mobility and to prepare Singaporeans for a more dynamic and uncertain future. So specialization, subject specialization is still very important, but it's more important to nurture the ability for them to connect things, for their skills, for their contribution to work seamlessly in this interconnecting world. So I think these are, look as if it's very simple, but I think we have spent a lot of money on the research and development in order to carry out this fourth strategy effectively, especially in the post-COVID-19. Let me go to the next. And now, I think we have to provide public goods in this knowledge-based and innovative-driven new economy by emphasizing on people-to-people connectivity. So we think that Singapore should provide these digital skills or digital platform as a public good for ASEAN to begin with. And online business-to-business dealing and meetings for small and medium enterprise is important. And so, but we have to overcome the regional traveling restriction first to begin with. And effective online education must be from the childcare all the way to the tertiary education. And this is people-to-people connectivity. Not just those in Singapore, we hope such online education facilities can also be made available for ASEAN countries. And we have to confront the digital economy to ensure a level playing field. I think this mitigating income disparity can only be avoided if we build strong digital capability for not just the people, but SME. Next is my final slide, I think number 5. Now, so digitalization is creating new industries, and it also offers SMEs effective means of reaching markets, which is one of the reasons why you see such a substantial poverty reduction in China, because now the individual, the small businesses, through the digital economy, they can effectively market their product. And then we have to build smart nation, and we have to build strong capability and also cybersecurity. And data is becoming so important. So sometimes government should come in as if it is a public good to support. And finally, can I go to, I think my time is up, I wouldn't take so much. So for cooperation, I think there are bigger rooms that we can work together. And in particular, I would say that sharing experience in handling COVID-19, this is important because if COVID-19 is not shared properly and economy cannot recover and unemployment get worse, it hit all ages. So have to quickly get this ability to handle the COVID-19. And I think China has a very important and responsible role to help developing countries, especially in coping with COVID-19 and in the vaccines. Then I think it's very important infrastructure. Savings in Asia must be used in Asia to support infrastructure development, to push the Belt and Road, and also to make economic recovery more viable and more vibrant. Now, regional banks like ADB, AIIB, World Bank Group, I think need to provide executive training to senior officials from ASEAN in various areas so that to strengthen their ability to formulate effective public policy. And finally, let me go to the next slide, please. And yes, so 3 recommendations. So please, we ask cooperation among Asia Pacific economies, help small and medium enterprise to adopt digital technologies. Otherwise, the digital divide will be worse than the divide caused by globalization. Number 2, build up data capability in data analytics and cybersecurity. We have to protect the data, and data analytics is so important. And we also have to harness this data as an asset. So thank you, Ambassador. My time's up. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Tan. Your presentation has been very enlightening. And of course, I think that what the Singaporean government has been doing and will be doing in the future to alleviate the crisis is an example to be followed by some economies. I wish really that we have far more knowledge about this, and this is very clear, very good to the point. And of course, you are quite aware that we have to develop the digital economy, of course, as a tool of the future. And honestly, the public good of digital economy will be something that we have to share all over the world. Then this is the turn I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Shanti Jagnanathan. Please, Shanti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
So many thanks for this opportunity. Many thanks to the organizers. And Chair, thank you for this opportunity on behalf of ADB to present our perspective. This is an important topic that's preoccupying all of us. So my presentation is in these few sections that I will start with very briefly touching on COVID and the impact on education and training, and ADB's framework for response to this COVID emergency, and the opportunity for the emergence of a new normal, and how such a crisis can be turned into an opportunity with the right actions. And finally, I want to end with a few thoughts on how we could use this to reimagine skills for jobs. So the first is that, I mean, I don't want to dwell on this too much because everybody is very well aware of the monumental impact, disruptions and impact that COVID has had on education and training arising from the closure of institutions, impact on job markets, impact on training, impact on job market transitions, the discontinuity of apprenticeship programs, workplace-based training, the pivoting that has been made mandatory for several businesses, and all the sort of disruptions that this has led to in terms of the workforce. And the impact has been very severe for the informal worker, for young people, for women, for disadvantaged communities. So all of this is having a fair amount of overall impact, but also very specific to certain communities like young people. And it's also, this COVID is actually adding another layer of challenges to already some pre-existing challenges, which are to do with previously existing issues around, skills gaps, coexisting with skills shortages, inadequate soft skills and digital skills, and the need for higher order skills for economies to move up the global value chain, high youth unemployment in literally all the developing member countries that ADB is collaborating with. Youth unemployment tends to be several times over the average unemployment rate. And there are also insufficient opportunities for adaptive and personalized learning, and insufficient investment to upgrade training infrastructure for digital capabilities and training needed for the transition to Industry 4.0 and for the future marketplace. So our take is that without concrete actions at this time, the crisis could actually turn into a big catastrophe with fairly, very, very impactful changes to the labor markets, with very adverse impact on labor markets. So it could arise from just several people dropping out of training, dropping out of institutions, having to cope with the livelihood needs, which will exacerbate the skill gaps that are already pre-existing in the workforce, and this will have long-term setbacks to human capital accumulation and productivity gains, which are crucial for Asia to move up Asia and the Pacific to move up the value chain in global markets. So this next segment is around ADB's framework for responding to the crisis. We have tried to craft this in three phases. The first is the more immediate response, where things are still in partial lockdown or partial closure mode. Several education institutions, training institutions in many of the countries that we work in remain closed for physical learning. So we've articulated a series of steps on what could be done to support the immediate response phase to ensure learning and training continuity. The second phase being the sort of recovery phase, when institutions begin to reopen, but business as usual is not going to kick in very, very soon. So what kind of measures, what kind of activities need to be in place for the recovery phase? And third is the phase of the long-term adjustment, what we would like to call rejuvenation, as we feel that this is really a timely opportunity to think about major changes or reimagine how we could do training, facilitation, job placements, and how we work with young people and people who are entering the workforce, but also equally people who are in the workforce and who may have lost jobs. So this is how it looks like. This is like an illustrative sample of how the different actions could be in the response and recovery and rejuvenation phase. ADB has committed 20 billion to partner with developing member countries in responding to the COVID crisis, and of the loans that have already been committed to our partners, a big segment of that is to support people who have been taken off the workforce, is to protect the people, the vulnerable people, is to provide cash transfers and wage subsidies, and to help people to get back on their feet after the crisis. And the recovery, the recovery area would also include a number of medium-term actions in which our portfolio of investments will be readjusted and aligned to the emerging needs in the market. And the rejuvenation would be where we will address new and innovative actions in our pipeline of projects over the next 3 years to provide the response necessary to bring long-term and transformational changes. So we really believe in the need for the emergence of a new normal, and we feel that the emergence of new normal is already being in the offing, and COVID is only kind of pressing the point in a way, and is also pressing the sort of the actions that governments and policymakers need to take in this domain. And education technology, or use of technology in education and training is we believe one big area of the new normal. This has already been on the rise, as per estimates by Metari. Investments in EdTech during 2018 and 2019 cumulatively were in excess of the investments that have been made over the past 20 years. So there's definitely a big push towards education technology, or technology for education and training. And this has got to do with whether it's artificial intelligence led or augmented reality, mixed reality, and a combination of digital technologies. And these are already in play. And of course, it's predominantly driven by private sector and through private consumption, more than in public training institutions. But we also see that big entities like Google and Microsoft are already making big inroads into the public school and training systems. So the new normal to our mind has a very important place for a new and transformative technologies. Another trend that has been in the making, which is also now reinforced by COVID, is the life cycle approach to skills for jobs. There's really no more qualifications for life. There will always be a need for continuous skills upgrade, reskilling, upskilling. So there's a change. There's a change needed for how we deliver training for the young people today. But equally, how do we keep people in the workforce relevant to the marketplace, clued in to the new trends, and able to tap the opportunities in the workforce. Again, digital skills are going to be central to something that the previous speaker had also emphasized, will be central to how we look to the future in terms of investing adequately in young people. There's also need for digital solutions to address learning deficits or skill gaps or shortfalls in the appropriate skills needed in the marketplace. Much greater demand. There'll be much greater demand for lifelong learning, which then it's not so much again the sort of you go for a very long and intensive training program and then you go into the workforce and you never return to training. So we believe that between training and working there will be a continuous interflow. So there will be people who will step out of the marketplace, step out of the workplace to go back into training, and therefore the whole thing about degrees for life will be replaced by a series of micro credentials and continuous flow of upgrading one's qualifications, expertise, and knowledge in several domains. This will be relevant for people in students, workers, as well as trainers and teachers. So we need to think about what these mean for regulations in terms of online learning and online training, the rising role of parents, communities, or like the COVID has really underscored the need for going outside institutions. The previous speaker, Professor Stan, mentioned about going beyond the books. So these will all have implications going forward. Timely action will actually help us to turn this crisis into an opportunity by bringing in these transformational changes, investing in transformational technology, investing in new pedagogical models that address distance learning, which are friendly to young people. And young people of today are not going to be committed to one occupation for their entire life. So therefore, the multiple options, flexible pathways will be the name of the game. At ADB, we'd like to see 6 overarching priorities that address strongly quality, relevance, and returns for youth. So quality as in quality of training and delivery, relevance as in how is it tied to the existing and emerging market needs, and how it promotes the concept of learning to learn and resilience and agility of the worker. So increasingly it's learning to learn and not just one stock of knowledge that remains with as a static knowledge that remains with the trainer, but something that inculcates the learning to learn paradigm, which allows the workers to come back and to be agile and to adjust their knowledge base on a continuous basis. So when we think about reimagining for the futures, at ADB we feel that this has been a pressing thing already, even before COVID, and COVID has further strengthened this direction. So the different pulls and pressures for this come from the geometric progression of disruptive technology, the open learning styles of the millennials. They no longer work with very linear approaches or just institution-based approaches. Skills-based have become very complex. It's a very fast-changing labor market. Skills are becoming obsolete very soon, and future labor markets are very uncertain. We're training people for the future where jobs that are going to be in existence then are not even known at the moment. So we're preparing for a future which is very uncertain. Hence, this whole thing about reimagining how education training is delivered for young people it needs to be reimagined and needs to become far more agile and flexible. When we think about ADB's response to this whole process of rejuvenation, this is how we like to think. that immediately to help people with cash transfers, subsidies, and so on to get them back on their feet and back in action. And in the medium term, to really protect budgets for skilling, upskilling, provide employment guarantee programs where public sector can play an active role in providing economic opportunities, and to regularize this whole shift, this migration, the great big migration to online learning globally. This has happened. How to make this. I'm sorry, it is the point 5 is not provide a boost. It's a provide a boost to new occupations that are appealing to youth, investing in training and work cycle, a whole work life cycle kind of approaches, and to kind of balance brick and mortar based training to more virtual and blended training. And we would like to, ADB would like to invest in, like the previous speaker spoke about economic opportunities, creating economic opportunities and jobs. At ADB, we are looking very strongly at the sort of job creation potential of infrastructure projects and how we can prepare skills to meet those needs in the future, and how to invest in centers of excellence for training that serve the interests of youth, but also other workers. ADB's education sector portfolio is largely oriented to technical and vocational education and training and skills development, and this is in response to the need from our partner countries for skills for jobs. And this is my last slide. Like Dr. Tan mentioned, we believe.
Sorry, you are muted. Madam Speaker, you are muted. I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is my last slide. So like Dr. Tan, we think that technology could be at the heart of this whole transformation going forward, where individuals.
Shanti, again, your mic. Yeah. Unmute your mic, Shanti.
Sorry, I think the organizer muted me because I'm a bit over time. So I will end here. So in terms of technology, just make the point that it needs to have an equity. As a development bank, we're very concerned with equity when it comes to adopting such technologies. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanti. It was a wonderful presentation of what the ADB is presenting, is doing in alleviating this really crisis in job creation. And I think that well, there is a lot of confluence on patterns and strategies with what we have heard of the Singaporean government that was expressed by Dr. Tan. Then without further ado, because we are running a little bit out of time, I give the mic to Felix.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Lei, and thanks a lot for the to the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council and the Institute of Strategic and International Studies for inviting the ILO to this session. So for this dialogue on how economies in the region can improve labor market outcomes and what governments, employers, workers' organizations can do, I would like to share some findings from the joint regional ILO and Asian Development Bank research on the COVID-19 youth employment crisis in Asia and the Pacific. And that includes, I hope you can see the screen, that includes the baseline youth labor market situation in Asia Pacific even before COVID-19, the impact of the crisis on youth employment from a strong labor market perspective. And we also point to a set of policy recommendations to consider first when including youth in more wider labor market economic recovery measures, and then secondly, when initiating youth-targeted employment interventions. So we know that even before the crisis, youth in Asia Pacific were already in a vulnerable labor market situation. Some of those vulnerabilities have already been mentioned by Ambassador Lei. And youth aged 15 to 24 are more likely to be unemployed than adults. The regional youth unemployment rate was 13.8% in 2019, compared with 3% for adults. And in fact, that rate had never recovered to pre-global financial crisis levels. And we see also that the ratio of youth to adult unemployment rates at sub-regional level range from 3 times in East Asia to more than 6 times in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And compared to other regions, Asia and the Pacific is home to the majority of the world's young people. So, and many of those 663 million youth were economically quite active, either looking for work or working. So the youth labor force participation in most of Asia Pacific was higher than the global average, except in Southern Asia, and that's due to the extremely low participation of young women. But economic activity itself of youth does not always mean productive employment and decent work, and we've seen the impact of this also in this crisis. More than 8 out of 10 young workers in Asia Pacific were in informal employment and often with limited social protection. And 1 in 4 young workers was living in conditions of extreme or moderate poverty. And what is important, I think, to this entire discussion on the nexus between skills and employment is economic exclusion affected 160 million youth in Asia Pacific, and that is almost 1 out of 4 youth in the region in 2019. So they were not in employment, education, or training, the so-called NEET. And nearly 3/4 of those NEETs in Asia Pacific are young women, with NEET rates for young women as high as 48% in Southern Asia. Now, the usual challenges of youth employment are increased in economic crisis, as we know. And over the past month, COVID-19 has led to massive disruption to the economy and labor markets. And our analysis shows it negatively and disproportionately impacts the prospects for youth, mainly through 3 channels. Of course, on the labor demand side, the job disruptions in the form of reduced working hours, reduced earnings, and eventually also job losses. And secondly, the disruptions in education and training as youth try to complete studies. And thirdly, and also important, the difficulties now in transitioning from school to work and moving between jobs and in a recession. If you take a closer look at job disruption, the COVID-19 crisis resulted in larger reductions of working hours for youth than adults in Asia Pacific. Just to illustrate this, in the first quarter, working hours for youth in the Republic of Korea reduced 5 times more than that of adults. And then working hour losses were significantly higher going into the second quarter of 2020. Youth are also more likely than adults to experience outright job loss, almost as a first out principle compared to the temporary job suspension that we see for adults. And that is partly because they have lower job tenure and work in less protected jobs. And the chart on the right illustrates this quite well, showing how the working hour losses in the Republic of Korea were much more likely to result in outright job loss for youth than was the case for adult workers. And from the available labor force survey data we have for 2020, it also shows that COVID-19 has had a much greater impact on unemployment rates of young people than on adults. But the extent to which young people work in the hardest hit sectors of the labor market plays an important role in the current crisis. So we've seen the disruption to the economy has impacted many sectors. 4 sectors are estimated globally to be most adversely affected by the collapse in economic activities, and that is wholesale and retail trade, manufacturing, real estate, business and administrative activities, and accommodation and food services. And the table on this slide shows the employment distribution of youth and adults in those low, medium, and high-risk sectors in Asia Pacific. And we find that young workers are more likely to be employed in at-risk sectors. So it means nearly 1 in 2 young workers in Asia Pacific, and that is more than 100 million youth, where they were employed in those 4 high-impact sectors. Now, the analysis also finds severe impact on young women. Young women represent 35% of total youth employment, but they are overrepresented in 3 out of the 4 high impact sectors, particularly in accommodation and food services. And the existing vulnerabilities, they are exacerbated also by the uneven distribution of unpaid household and care work. And beyond the quantity of employment, the quality of jobs for young people will also be affected. So we've seen the lack of formal employment opportunities is likely to increase informal employment and non-standard forms of work. Beyond the job disruption, and previous speakers have already alluded to it, the disruption to education and training have profound impacts on youth employability and employment. At its peak in April, school closures affected more than 90% of students worldwide and also disrupted technical vocational education and training. And in addition, the disruptions of work-based learning are quite reflected in the significant impacts we've seen on apprenticeships and internships, including from the various services, the challenges firms reported due to the infrastructure issues and the limited digital literacy. Now, with training moving online, the unequal access to digital technologies can also widen those gaps in education and training prospects. The analysis also shows that the school to work transition will be more difficult during the crisis and recovery from COVID-19. So the young people now entering the labor market, they're encountering a market with fewer vacancies and at the same time compete for jobs with more experienced workers. And in addition, prior to the crisis, the pathways of a large share of young workers was particularly through a first job in sectors that are now most impacted, such as wholesale and retail trade and manufacturing. So pathways that are now disrupted. So overall, this analysis and evidence from the previous crisis indicates that transiting from school to work during the economic crisis will have also comes at a time when the world of work is undergoing quite transformative changes, and some of the technological changes have already been mentioned before. And we see that COVID-19 is likely to accelerate some of the digitalization efforts in order to uphold health and safety measures while keeping economic activities running. And we know that technological advancements, including artificial intelligence and robotics, they transform labor market opportunities and skills requirements for youth. And eventually, technology has a nuanced impact on jobs. But also ILO research shows that young workers face the highest risk of automation. That is partly because often entry-level jobs tend to have a greater proportion of automatable tasks. There's therefore also a need for reskilling, upskilling, and eventually also to continue promoting lifelong learning and skills development to facilitate access to and those transitions to productive employment for a more inclusive recovery from COVID-19. So in response to the crisis, many countries have embraced unprecedented fiscal stimulus programs and policy measures. Many of them have been relevant to youth employment, which the ILO has categorized under 4 pillars linked to international labor standards. So from measures to stimulate the economy and employment, to supporting enterprises, jobs and incomes, for example, through employment retention schemes, to protecting workers in the workplace, for example, through teleworking arrangements. And also through relying on social dialogue together with governments, workers and employers organizations. Now, the question is also, are countries spending enough to negate some of those labor market disruptions? And the ILO Asia Pacific Employment and Social Outlook 2020 that was launched yesterday shows that this expansionary fiscal policy has played quite a significant role in supporting economic activity and preventing working hours from falling further. But the fiscal stimulus packages are small relative to the overall labor market damage in Asia Pacific. And they have been concentrated in the high income economies. So if you look at this chart to demonstrate this, the announced fiscal stimulus measures in Asia Pacific as a region equate to 4.1% of total working hours. While at the same time, the estimated working hour losses averaged 11.1% in the first 3 quarters. And the relative size of the fiscal stimulus is much smaller in low and lower middle income countries in the region. So what are some relevant policy measures to tackle the youth employment crisis in Asia Pacific? And it is against this background, of course, it's urgent to continue to adopt and implement large-scale and targeted measures to stimulate economy and youth employment for a more job-rich recovery. And again, this requires balancing this inclusion of youth in wider labor market and economic recovery measures, combined with more youth-targeted, gender-sensitive interventions. just on the wider economic recovery measures, we've seen a lot of the immediate support targeted at firms and sectors that are most adversely impacted by decreased economic activity. And moving forward, that sector support also needs to take into account sectors with the highest potential for a job-rich recovery for youth. And from our point of view, building back better also needs to go further and take into account the potential for incorporating climate change, climate mitigation and adaptation, and the potential for green jobs. And I think especially the construction sector, as was mentioned before, is quite relevant in that sense. So some of the prioritized measures that can be directed at young people, also likely in the hardest hit sectors, they need to be linked to active labor market programs to address those three shocks. So from youth targeted wage subsidies and public employment programs to job information and employment services. But as mentioned before, youth also need to continue their professional development throughout the crisis to acquire skills. In that sense, apprenticeship programs, demand-driven skills development, they remain key, especially in the sectors that we see with potential for growth. And from our point of view, we need to pay attention to the role of digital inclusion for more equitable access to education, training, and employment. And the last one here to mention would also be, of course, wage employment is not the only option. There's also entrepreneurship and self-employment opportunities that can be supported through access to capital combined with more non-financial services for young entrepreneurs. But eventually, and I think as we start this discussion, a lot of the impact on youth employment will depend on the effectiveness and the sequencing of those mix of policy responses that are put in place. So thank you for your attention, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Felix. I think it was a very informative presentation, and then you gave a lot of light on what there is lies ahead for the employment, especially in the youth sector and in general in the region. I think that the key word for the future is technology. I think that the three panelists has a coincidental thought that technology, we have to develop technology in order to advance in the post-COVID world. And no doubt about it, this technology both in the use of all businesses and in the use of all employment in the future. But I think that we run out of time. I don't know, Calvin, if we have time for question and answers. Is this already past 10 o'clock?
Yeah, maybe we'll take just 2 to 3 questions in the Q&A.
Oh, please.
And then we'll end maybe at 10:10, hopefully. Is that okay, Ambassador?
Go ahead, Calvin, please read them.
Yeah, okay. So I only have 2 questions in the Q&A tab at the moment.
Okay, good.
Both from Sonia Rose. So the question asks, do you see the standard 3 or 4 year university degrees being utilized less and being replaced with smaller courses and a commitment to lifelong learning? Or will they continue to be the standard as well as lifelong learning? That's one question. And the second question is on study to work transition. So the second question asks, should education policy going forward require education providers to engage with business and the labor market to ensure that the graduates are employable? Maybe we'll do those 2 questions first.
Dr. Tan, would you like to take the floor, or Shanti or Felix for those 2 questions?
Very quickly, I will answer this. I think the degree or the diploma, they are still important, because there's one way to filter out and also identify the ability of a person. But I think once you get into working, performance is more important. So in our university, we have this new approach where after you had your degree, you can come back for free to upgrade your knowledge, otherwise become obsolete after a while. Now, as for whether universities should link with the business or private sector, in Singapore, our universities, they are supposed to monitor the employability of the graduates. If the graduate cannot find job, then something wrong with the university as well. So therefore, I think the apprenticeship is a compulsory, and also in that, or you call industrial internship, that will allow you to really can perform after you graduate. I think this German model is quite impressive, and we have taken a bold step to follow the German model. So in that sense, the university, whether it's polytechnic or Institute of Technical Education, they are actually linked to the private sector companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Shanti or Felix, would you
Okay,
like
so
to?
very quickly, I think it's probably the answer is not either or, but more a good combination of both options, and for both education institutions to become more agile and responsive to the needs. So institutions are mostly predominantly oriented to entry-level education and training. So they need to think about becoming, I mean, already I think in a number of universities in the US have rejuvenated their lifelong learning centers to become ongoing avenues for skills upgrade. So I think institutions need to think about a combination of degrees as well as short credentials, and for both early career training and mid-career training. And the role of the employers in private sector is undeniable, and this partnership needs to strengthen and to become more diverse. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shanti. Felix?
Thanks. I think just to add from my side, I think the aspects that were mentioned both on the government side, there's of course the need for the more inter-ministerial coordination, cooperation between the education and the labor side. But essentially what it comes down is to ensure that the education and training corresponds to the needs of the labor market and is demand driven. And that needs to involve employers and their forecasts and needs. I think there are good examples already out there from various initiatives in the region, including through sector skills councils and other initiatives, how those, how existing education and training initiatives can be better aligned with the demand of employers. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't want to take more of your time, that we are already run out of it. There are still some questions that are pending. We will answer them through the internet. And then we will channel those questions to the relevant panelists. It is okay, Kelvin?
Yes, I think that's fine.
And we come to a close to this session. Thank you very much to all of you panelists. Dr. Tan, it was really very enlightening, your participation. Shanti, I really appreciate your point of view. And Felix, again, thank you very much for your participation. It was very enlightening, the three of them. And then thank you very much for all the audience. And then I'm sorry to run out of time, but still those 4 questions will be answered through the internet. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much to all panelists for sharing your thoughts and perspectives on the matter. Next, we'll be taking a group photo for the panelists of this session only. So we now kindly ask our distinguished role players for plenary session 4 to switch on or keep your cameras on, and for everyone else to turn off their cameras. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We will be proceed immediately to plenary session 5 of the PECC General Meeting. This session is titled Digital Economy and its Infrastructure for an Inclusive Society. Dr. Hyung Chung Kim will serve as the moderator for this session, and he is already joined by panelists from a diverse set of backgrounds. As a matter of fact, I even see my former boss among the panelists there. So without further ado, I will now invite Dr. Hyung Chung Kim to kickstart the discussion.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I am Kim Hong-jong, President of Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. Thank you for the joining this session, plenary session 5, titled Digital Economy and its Infrastructure for an Inclusive Society. And then I'd like to thank you for the panelists, 4 panelists, 4 speakers. First of all, I'd like to thank Miss Elena Noor for joining us. And from the Asia Society Policy Institute. And then Dr. Peter Covey from the University of California in San Diego for joining us to talk about the digital economy. And Mr. Lu Guangtong from China, CNC PECC engineer, cyber emergency response team from China. And lastly, but not the least, Professor Naoko Iwasaki. Okay, yeah, you are. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the shaking hands. Institute of E-Government from Waseda University. And I welcome all of the 4 speakers for joining this session. The title of this session is about the digital economy and its infrastructure for an inclusive society. So as you may know very well, now it's time for the digital economy. So after the COVID-19, then we realized that our ordinary life is covered with the digitalization. But the prospect of digital economy has several considerations, as you know. Of course, I mean, it can be helpful to the human ordinary life by enhancing the efficiency and also enhancement of the human welfare. But also it may give to some kind of the widening disparity between among income groups for the gaining access to the digital network. And also we can have another aspects of the business. And so maybe the business society can experience the enormous revolutionary changes after the total introduction of this digital economy. And as you know that we have no regulation, no norm for the international standard for the digital trade. So that is another issue, but that is a very big issue. And we know that the global value chain, is extended the recent 2 decades. But when it comes to the digital economy, then that kind of value chains will change a lot. So I hope that all of these kind of issues can be touched in this session. First of all, the questions about this session is what are the key issues and challenges of growing digital economy in the direction of shared prosperity? And then will the digital economy create a new north-south divide, or can it help to bridge the gap in the long run? And how should the governments tackle the issue of inclusive growth? And what are the cost implications for this effort? When you're talking about these issues, I recommend that the Chatham House rule can be applied so that we can talk our role, our opinions freely, and also there may be some kind of many questions, and then I hope all of these kind of questions can be made through the Q&A features in Zoom. The Q&A room is different from chatting room. So I hope the participants in this session may raise the question through the Q&A room. Okay. And then after the speakers and speech, then I collect all the questions, and then I ask the speakers to answer some of these questions. First of all, I'd like to introduce Ms. Elena Noor for your speech. Yeah, please, the floor is yours, Elena.
Thank you very much. Good evening from Washington, D.C., a very cold Washington, D.C. Thank you for having me at this event and for the opportunity to offer some thoughts in this session. I have to say this is my first time contributing to a PECC event. And I'm as much of an economist as I am a bar of soap. So I hope you'll indulge me if I depart a little from the norm of your economic focused discussion. We don't have very much time, so let me get into it. There's a lot of exuberance linked to the promise of the digital economy. And we talk a lot about how the digital economy will improve the lives of those, especially living in the developing economies of the global South. In the few minutes that I have, let me try to unpack a few evolving challenges of digitalizing the economy that we must all confront if tech is to help create a more inclusive and equitable society. A reality check, if you will. And I have 3 points to make. My starting point is one that was raised by the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation last year. And that point relates to access and accessibility. The high-level panel called for a multi-stakeholder and multilateral approach to supporting digital inclusion and digital equality for women and traditionally marginalized groups. The specially abled or disabled minorities and the indigenous populations of countries that we're concerned with are subjected to a different kind of digital divide. And they're far less likely to have adequate access, if at all, to computers and the internet, if they are even afforded the privilege of higher education. They're also rarely afforded the opportunity to participate in tech use and development, much less the chance to determine the rules of the road of the technology that will affect, govern, or be imposed upon them. A simple but practical example for consideration is the inability to use a keyboard because a minority language or dialect may not have been programmed into that software. This leads to my second point, which is about transparency and accountability of data collection, data management, and data governance. There is a need to question, if not challenge, national level data sets that do not adequately capture the data of minority or indigenous populations. There are now effective indigenous data governance structures or initiatives in countries like New Zealand and Canada. But in the Asian context, I believe there is much work to be done. There are bright spots though. Thailand, for example, there are communities that are collecting their own census information. And by doing so, they're asking different questions than what the national census would otherwise collect. As a result, there's been an improvement in the way data is being used to deliver funding to these indigenous communities. My third and final point relates to equity and social justice. One aspect to this point relates to bias. There have been a number of studies that have found bias and the same histories of racism and discrimination encoded even at the design and construction level of artificial intelligence systems. A major part of the ASEAN economy consists of SMEs, accounting for what some estimates say between 89 to 99% of total establishments. So when platforms are imported by developing economies for deployment to and use by these SMEs, many of whom lack the capability or the capacity to ask the right questions, then it should be in the consideration of those in power to ask for them, what are the platforms or systems that are being imported? Are they truly reflective and well suited for the local context? What data gathered went into the construction of those platforms or systems? How was that data collected? The other aspect to equity and social justice relates to technology flows. By the turn of the century, 90% of the world's population is expected to live outside Europe and North America. Most will live in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. It's important, therefore, for emerging economies to not just have a seat at the table as norms, rules, regulations, and laws are being fashioned at the international level, whether in free trade agreements or otherwise, for these technologies that will underpin the digital economy. It's important for emerging economies to have a voice and an equal say in the governance architecture of cyberspace. So to wrap up, let me just say this. For technology to be truly inclusive for the society of the future, it should be available to and serve the needs of the world's largest populations, not just those of rich, powerful states or the privileged tech bros within the English-speaking corridors of the global north. Democratizing the design of tech, coding ethics into tech, and critically evaluating the governance structures of data and algorithms through the lens of different stakeholders, not just the quote like-minded, can contribute towards minimizing the compounding risks of technological domination, discrimination, and destabilization. I think these are some of the points for us to consider as we wax lyrical about the digital economy going forward. So let me just end here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena, for your very short but very, very insightful presentation. You're talking about the transparency, accountability as well, consideration for the SME and many other issues. You raised many interesting issues. And the next speaker is the Professor Peter Cowie. Please, Professor.
Well, thanks very much for having me this evening. It's always a pleasure to return to a PECC meeting. I've been lucky to participate in others before. I want to take an approach that is a little bit more defined by looking at the technology drivers of these changes in digital technology and some of the economic considerations. Again, because these are short interventions, I'm going to be very selective, and I want to acknowledge all the points that were just made in the last talk. So the first big point is simply that digital technology is here, and it is going to become more pervasive, and it is unpredictable in many of its boundaries. I am unfortunately old enough to remember when the introduction of mobile phones was considered to be a threat by a number of countries around the world in low-income countries because it was a toy of the rich. And in fact, what happened was, of course, that it set off a wave of connectivity, which is far from perfect, but was far beyond anybody's expectations for what a traditional landline system could do. These factors just simply say that digital technology is going to shape our lives and our activities. They're subject to all the ethical questions that were just raised, but we have to deal with the realities that they are going to be pervasive and shape everything. So in the world today, in medium and low-income countries, we're already seeing digital technology substantially overturn many traditional activities. Some are directly connected to the flow of global commerce. And of course, we want to be sure that that spreads to the small and medium-sized enterprises that are not so much plugged in directly to the global economy. Logistics are a good example. Logistics are being revolutionized around the world for every country engaging in global commerce. Another is financial services. And here, in fact, lower and middle income countries are taking the lead in changing the cost and availability of financial services because, in a sense, they have less ancient infrastructure in financial services that is in itself a block towards innovation. But I think the really interesting things are going to be when we truly get a broad, inexpensive mobile internet system, which is coming with 5G. Again, this will not be broadly distributed at the beginning, but it will become pervasive in one degree or another in the years to come. And when that happens, it's going to change the structure of economic activity in the world. Some of those changes are ones that play into the hands of the big global players, but others are creating opportunities for innovation and economic activity that very much play to the role of smaller enterprises and specialists and innovators. I want to start with an example that is silly because this is a serious meeting, and sometimes a silly example helps make the case more clearly. I know a 15-year-old who has a large trading business on the internet. His trading business is in two commodities. The one is athletic shoes. Athletic shoes are distributed at the high end in limited runs for specialized markets. And if you can buy early and guarantee authenticity, you can resell to other groups. And the people who specialize in this are all small entrepreneurs. It's too small a business for the big companies, but it's a very profitable business. And a 15-year-old figured it out. But here's his second line of business, and this is the more interesting one. You may all be familiar from your children or nephews or friends' children about the trading card business. There are trading cards for sports. There are trading cards for games, Pokemon, for example. And these trading cards become traded commodities. This particular, I see somebody raise their hand, they're an enthusiast. So when you think about this, this kid has figured out that trading in these cards is a specialized niche. But one of the problems is forgery. And so it turns out that over the web, you can go to specialists who will authenticate your cards as not being fakes. And thus it's opened a global market for trading in Pokemon cards, all run by a 15-year-old. The point really here is that there are many types of economic exchanges in the world that people value that are highly specialized and customized to very small segments of the population, but sustaining of successful businesses. And what digital is doing is lowering the transaction cost, increasing the availability of financial services, and allowing for the customization of markets in whole new ways. That's a good thing. And one of the things that government policy needs to do is to enable that sort of transition to take place. Here's a second example that is literally the lifeblood of the world. The rise of climate change is having a major impact on agriculture around the world. Essentially today, particularly if you are in agricultural exporting, you have to be adapting to sustainable green supply chains. But at the front of the end of that is precision agriculture, the use of digital technology to change how farming is done. And what is going to happen is that the innovations in using digital technology for small scale farming, and the examples I have in mind are cocoa farms in Africa where this is happening, get linked to the sustainable green supply chains to show the lowest carbon footprint for producing the commodity agriculture and shipping it around the world. These are the sorts of things that have to be done in order to sustain small and medium-sized enterprise as we transform the structure of the world economy. So what's that mean for government policies? Let me suggest a couple of things that are there. The first is that we need to focus on the cost of connectivity. There are still too many countries in the world where the cost of connectivity for broadband is too high, even if it's available. And there are many countries where broadband is not yet available. But the technology is now such that with the right government policies, broadband can take its next wave of expansion in dramatic ways. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Second thing that we can do is invest in human resources. And in human resources, what I want to suggest is that people always say, well, we need better training. But there are some types of training that are really productive of creating the sort of market ecosystem that allows small and medium enterprises to flourish. One of the things that should be on the top of the list for any country is investing in the education in digital design tools, teaching people the ways to think about digital design. And that should be a staple that is a major part of our human capital investments in the year to come. And that should include thinking about cybersecurity by design, because as digital becomes universal, cybersecurity problems are going to become a problem. And finally, I'd just like to point out that in the world I'm describing, data is going to be everywhere and it's going to be flowing. We, of course, need appropriate rules and regulations about privacy and security, but that data will flow across borders and that it will become part of machine learning and artificial intelligence to allow supply chains and even the networks that connect people to work efficiently is also true. And so, like it or not, we are in a world where there are going to be infrastructures driving enormous amounts of data across borders and creating a digital commons. It's a big challenge, but it's a good challenge. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your speech. Professor Covey shows the ample opportunities that the digital economy could bring about, and in a very convincing way. And also the policy recommendations, such as the cost effectiveness and education and the investment in the digital infrastructure, are very good questions for the governments of the Asia Pacific. Thank you for your speech. And the next speech is to the Mr. Lu Guangtong from China. Yes, please 7 to 10 minutes speech. Yeah. Thank you. Please, Mr. Lu.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kim, and thank you, PECC, for having me here. Today, I want to focus on one aspect of digital economy, which is the digital platforms. So from my perspective, the digital economy, the infrastructure of digital economy includes not only the internet access, but also the internet platforms. And for some societies, some specific societies, these platforms even become the crucial infrastructure for the whole economic activities. So what roles does internet platform play in achieving social inclusion? On the positive side, first of all, internet platforms has broken the traditional geographic boundaries, enabling people from rural area and remote areas to enjoy quality service that used to be platforms like we are having today helps thousands of rural students to gain access to quality urban education services. Secondly, the internet has, to some extent, broken the information boundary. In the past, the imbalance of society was largely due to the unequal access to information. But now, search engines and other means of internet has made the cost and the opportunity of obtaining information more equal. However, on the other hand, the rise of internet platform has brought several challenges to social inclusion. First of all, we cannot ignore that different age groups have different level of acceptance of the internet tools. In some specific economies, older groups are finding it increasingly harder to access to public transport and health service because they are not familiar with IT tools. Secondly, the relationship between digital economy and the subsistential economy. This issue, from my perspective, will have large influence to the future economy development. As internet platforms are setting foot in more and more fields, the traditional real economy, especially the traditional service industry, is undergoing a major transformation. For example, we used to wave our hands to call a taxi. But nowadays, people just call taxi from their mobile phone using mobile apps. As a result, the traditional taxi industry have to share some of its profit with the internet platforms. The same thing is happening for restaurants, hotels, publishing, and even educations. Nowadays, the internet platform have much greater bargaining power than traditional industries. So how to balance the relationship between digital economy and the real economy is an unavoidable issue for inclusive development. Lastly, we must pay attention to the ethical side of the technology, especially the artificial intelligence. Algorithm, as former speakers has mentioned, can be biased. And in some certain economies, this may widen the inequality between people. With regard to these issues, various countries are already taking certain steps. For example, Japan has introduced artificial intelligence principle, and the European Union has introduced their general data protection regulation, digital service tax, and new competition tools. China and the United States, on the other hand, are conducting anti-monopoly investigation on digital platforms. However, it should be said that the development of digital economy is still in early stage, and the promotion policy of the inclusiveness of digital economy is also in initial stage. It will take us and all of you in this room to work together. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lu, for your your speech. You touched the many aspects of the change actually in our ordinary society when the digital economy has arrived. So many various aspects that you raised, and very interesting aspects, I think. And Professor Iwasaki from Masada University. Professor, please.
Thank you very much. And may I use my own slide?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you see this on the slides? It's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. No problem. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me as a very fruitful session today. And our topic is on digital economy and its infrastructure for an inclusive society. So, yes, my name is Naoko Iwasaki, and I'm a professor of Institute of E-Government at Masada University, and also I'm a president of International Academy of CIO, and also a deputy director of an APEC E-Government and Research Center. So today I'd like to introduce and explain about the aging societies and digitalization. And so my research area is in digital government and aging society and ICT and smart cities. Focus on the smart digital cities and crisis management and so on. And so these maps show the proportion of a population aged 60 over in 2015 and 2050, and demonstrate the speed at which populations are aging. So there are 703 million persons aged 65 years or over in the world in 2019. The number of older persons is projected to double to 1.5 billion in 2050, and globally, as a share of the population and aged 65 years or over, and increased from 6% in 1990 to 90% in 2019. So the next slide is on the Society 5.0. Definition of Society 5.0 is that a human-centered society that balances an economic advancement and with a resolution of social problems and by a system that highly integrates cyberspace and physical space. So the Society 5.0 was proposed as a future society in Japan. So under Society 5.0, next generation digital economic model with emerging technologies such as AI or 5G or an IoT in Japan will be needed. So there are a lot of issues and goals on innovations for the SDGs 2030s, or digitalization of the government, or digital transformation, DX, or aging societies, digital silver cities, and COVID-19 in recent years. However, if we will be successfully and solve them, and we can increase the added values, or to improve the productivities, to strengthen the international competitiveness, and it can make a society which no one will be behind. So, for example, one of my measures is on digital government. Now, not only Japan, but also many countries try to focus on using new technologies. Such as AI and RPA to digitalize the government or municipalities. AI and RPA will help to establish an effective and efficient government and can provide a high quality government services and under user need. And the next slide is a criteria of the silver ICT and digital innovations. And the silver market will grow at 27 trillion US dollars by 2050s. For example, home electronics like a smart home or sensor network or remote sensors or cooker safety and so on. And healthcare services in telehealth, e-health, telecare, robotics, or service innovation in hospitals, and life innovations and e-inclusions, or online shopping, or fintech, e-payment, or ICT for aging, or social alarms, or social networking, and so on. So this market will be very huge in the future. And the next slide is a new concept with an aging and digital and global societies. One of Japan's greatest public policy question is whether digital can be used as a policy tool in three social structures. One is a digital society, second one is a global society, and the third one is a super aging societies. So these issues have become a challenge not only in Japan but also in all countries. So what is the role of digital and the super aging societies? And innovation has been brought to all aging people's lives and by positive use of digital. And moreover, digital will be an engine for economic growth and innovation to support aging societies. And the silver ICT is for the inclusive societies and innovations and for ICT applications, including healthcare, or employment, education, home, securities, disaster management, transportation, and so on. So we need to establish a digital silver city and for coming aging societies. And the next one is a new technologies for the digital transformations, including an AI and 5G or TVET or IoT and robot and so on. By utilizing these emerging technologies and regarding digital and identity, there is no definition of digital and IDs. So there needs to be definitions of umbrella digital technology terms such as AI, 5G, and IoT, and so on, or they will render themselves moot in the relevance and applicability and for the regulatory coordination in near future. And the global societies and cross-country economies and supply chain management, as I mentioned, and silver industry in the market will be very huge in the future. So as I mentioned, as an issue of super aging society will be a global challenge in the future. So with this digital and silver market with very huge and not only in developed countries, but also in developing country as well. And data free flow and with trust. To facilitate and free flow of data and the necessity for the agile policy and approaches, for example, confidentiality and integrity and availability. These are very three important key issues, I think. And finally, international cooperation must play a critical role in the post-COVID-19. So the current economic environment is one of the great uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the most important inhibitors of robust growth. So the post and the COVID-19, the issues on the aging society will be more important and serious, I think. So as I mentioned, and Japan is #1 super aging society. So therefore, and we need to lead and show our model to as next aging societies from the success society 5.0. So I think the role of PECC and PCC and will be more important. So therefore, and I hope and PCC and should be a leader and for the new framework and for the digital silver economy framework platform. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Iwasaki, for your very interesting presentation about the silver industry. You highlight the silver industry, how to apply the digital economy to the silver industry. And then your last comments that PCC should be a leader for new framework for digital silver economy platform. Yeah, good, yes. Thank you very much for your speech. And then actually we have about the 20 minutes for the discussion. And then we have many questions. First question I would like to raise is, it's very interesting. Is the government's role to create jobs in the public sector? Is this artificial measure unsustainable as it is not demand driven? So it is mean that the public sector has an obligation to create jobs in public sector. That is the other because is this artificial measure sustainable as it is not demand driven? Is there anybody who can answer to these questions? How about the Professor Cowie or?
Well, I'll take a start at it. A lot of the jobs in the public sector that will be tied to digital are tied to things about modernizing the traditional public infrastructure and services. And there's nothing wrong with using that as a leverage point to develop skilled people for the digital economy in general, because people aren't going to necessarily stay in the public sector forever. Now, if the idea is really that you're going to use the public sector to create just jobs for their own sake in the digital area, that does not seem to me a smart strategy. And it's not a smart strategy, in my opinion, because technologies themselves are not easily predictable in the way that they're going to grow technically, so to speak, but also in the business models and the social organizations that will make them productive and successful. And for that, you want market cues in the private sector. And you also want the nonprofit sector outside of government, which in many ways is often more flexible than government structures, as drivers of those innovations. So up to a point, public sector employment for digital is a good thing. Beyond that point, it starts to introduce poor incentives for being really creative.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the answer. And we have also another answer from the speaker, one of the speakers as the plenary session 4, Ms. Shanti Jagannathan. She answered like this: the government does create jobs in the public sector through infrastructure investment and other economic activities. The government also has a role to play for employment guarantee programs in times of economic distress and the national calamities like now. However, governments can always collaborate with the private sector to ensure that creating jobs and investing and trading is linked to the assessment of market needs and requirements. Okay, right. And then we have another questions. All right, this is for the Professor Cowie again. In the digital commons, what is the right balance between safety of the country and the individual privacy? Again,
yes.
Right balance between safety of the country and the individual privacy, please.
I hope I'm understanding the question accurately, but here's how I'm understanding it. Countries, every country has public safety and national security considerations. And that leads to surveillance of citizens and commercial activities. And at the same time, countries that we want to live in also have protections of personal privacy. And that question of how you balance the two is one of the really difficult issues. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about how to think about this balance and how it's played out in different countries. For example, in the United States, as is well known, we have much less comprehensive privacy protection rules than, let's say, in the European Union. But the one area in the United States where there are extensive basic constitutional guarantees is about the role of government in surveilling individual citizens. And that's the result of the fact that the Constitution in the United States was written after rebellion against a king whose soldiers often went into private homes randomly to check on behavior of citizens. Now, the second thing to understand is that this problem is not going to be resolved very easily by saying, oh, private firms shouldn't cooperate with governments. Governments are going to insist that they cooperate to some extent. But there are some promising innovations about this balance. One of the most interesting things to look at is that some of the big digital firms are now publishing as part of their annual corporate reports the number of times that governments in different countries are issuing judicial orders, we call them subpoenas in the United States, for them to turn over data to the government on their private customers. And you can get, by looking at this, a snapshot of how often the French government versus the English government versus the Malaysian government are demanding surveillance with the cooperation of private firms. It doesn't tell you the details, but it starts to tell you where and how the activities are gathering. We're going to need a whole bunch of those signals to get some more transparency in this area.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. Ms. Alina Noor, can you answer the same questions about the balance between safety of the country and individual privacy? Ms. Noor, please.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. Hi, Lori. To me, the answer depends on the context of the community or the country itself. And it's a dynamic setting. So what may apply in one country at a certain time may not apply in the same country at another time. Likewise, what may apply in one country obviously will not necessarily apply in another country. So I think it's for the society and government to figure out together.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And Dr. Yos Rizal Damuri has raised his hands to ask a question verbally. Dr. Damuri, it's your chance to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kim. I'm interested in looking at, in exploring what Professor Kohi mentions about the importance of having international set of rules, because rules cannot be just applied or implemented by the national government and applied to only at the national level. But considering that there are a lot of interest in the digital technology and digital economy, and also we've seen that the different stages of developments, how do you have to pursue this kind of efforts by making some kind of harmonizing the rules over internet and digital platforms? Currently, there are 80 countries in the WTO discussing about it. But do you think it is quite appropriate to start from the trading side of the digital economy, like those countries currently discussing? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions, Professor.
So talk about the $1 billion question. That certainly is it. Let me suggest a couple of thoughts, not to fully answer the question. The first thought is that it's not going to be the case that we're going to get harmonization with absolutely uniform rules. What we can get is some principles with some teeth to them that set some boundaries around the practices of individual countries. That's the first step. And that's not so much right now likely to be done in trade agreements, although it could be done in a trade agreement. It's more likely to be done in new arrangements of regulator to regulator discussions, bilaterally or regionally as they go forward. The second thing I'd just simply say about this is that the rules themselves, these understandings, we should understand are always going to be about the things that are most common and detailed and technical and functional. And so there are going to be certain issues about civil liberties and constitutional issues that it's going to be very hard to agree upon. When we came to an agreement in the internet age about the common rules governing competition globally in communications networks, there were still big exceptions for certain things about audio-visual, for example, content. It was just too hot and too sensitive to deal with. But those rules that we did have in common were good enough. And similarly, there are going to be ways of dealing with privacy that basically separate business functions from some of the most delicate personal issues. And if you want an example of that today, you all have heard that the US and the European Union do not have agreement right now with a functional privacy shield, okay? But what that doesn't tell you is that right now, massive amounts of data are going back and forth between the US and the European Union on business-to-business relations that are still allowed between the two regions. So those more commercial technical data flows are not stopped, even though we have still some big issues about personal civil liberty protection.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And then we have some questions to the Professor Iwasaki. The first question is about the digital literacy of the aged population. You know, the silver industries, the digitalization of the silver industry is very important. But questions about does it have the consideration or assumption that the digital literacy of the aged population, because aged people, as you know, it's difficult to accommodate themselves to the new digital things. And then there is another question, Professor Iwasaki. Digital economy is the key to achieving SDGs. In which area, in particular, digital economy can play a role? Yes, please, Professor Iwasaki.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very good questions. And the first one is digital literacies for the aging peoples. And I have implemented the APEC and the project on ICT applications for the aging peoples and for 10 years. And I just started a new project, an APEC project on the smart and silver innovations among several economies. And we found there are two types of aging. And one is an active aging, and the second one is a negative aging peoples. So how to promote the ICT literacies for those two types of the aging peoples? And so we implemented a lot of smartphone classes or lectures for the aging peoples. But this is very difficult and challenges for us, and because we have almost 20% or the 30% of negative seniors. So how to include those negative seniors? So we need to think about this is a very important and difficult questions and among an PECC or an APEC meetings. And the second one is SDGs, and this is a very important topic as well. And SDGs and has totally 70 goals, as well as totally 569 small goals. But I think all of these goals need to concern the ICT and areas. For example, during the coronas, and for example, we need the digital infrastructures for the educations or employment or the work styles, and our lifestyle has just changed to the new normals. So I think the total, all of the SDGs goals is related to the digitalization, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And there is another interesting question. What about the corporate surveillance where our digital footprints are tracked, amalgamated, and sold to the highest bidder in order to target advertising or political messaging? I think that is related to the data privacy. And then as far as I know, the United States and Japan recently reached the agreement about the digital partner agreement. So this is something like the anti-digital regionalization. So that is quite different views from the China, and also slightly different from the Europe's GDPR as well. So data privacy, that is an emerging issue actually. Is there anybody who can answer to these questions? How about the Dr. Lu, Mr. Lu?
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to raise a few points about the four questions. Firstly, the question between national security and the individual privacy. So from my perspectives, in many certain societies, especially in 2020, lots of personal data were collected on the purpose of public health to deal with the coronavirus. So from China, there are two principles that I've raised in order to protect the personal privacy. Firstly, the personal information should be collected. The extent of its collection should be restricted strictly to the necessity of the public health purpose. So it shouldn't be used to a different purpose, and it shouldn't be over-collected over the necessity point. Secondly, we should make sure that the personal data was used and only used for this, so it cannot be reused to another different purpose. That is the basic principle to restore balance between national security and individual privacy.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. And then I'd like to ask some questions to Ms. Noor as well about the corporate surveillance. Ms. Noor, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. It's a fascinating question, and one that was the subject of Shoshana Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism. So it's certainly a huge topical issue that I think has generated a lot of debate among not only those interested in privacy, but also obviously by the lawyers of big tech firms as well. There's a larger issue, I think, and one is that we ourselves sometimes voluntarily give up all our information to these firms, perhaps out of necessity. But also sometimes we don't realize that we're giving up as much information as we think we are. And so that becomes liability later on. There's also a larger argument that maybe takes it a little more seriously, maybe in a little more exaggerated fashion. And that's the argument of what the authors of a book called Digital Colonialism call the capitalization of human life. And that is the extraction and capture of data, all data related to human life, the tracking of our movements, of our heartbeats for health purposes, They term it colonialism of sorts in terms of data capture and extraction for capital purposes.
Okay,
So
thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. Professor Cowie, do you have anything to talk about this issue?
I think that we've had good comments. I'll pass.
Okay. Thank you very much for the. Okay, now it's running out of time, so I think I have to close this session. Thank you for your excellent speech and also excellent questions and answer as well. And then I hope this kind of chances to talk about the digital economy in more times in the future. And thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to all panelists and participants who have contributed to this discussion. For the photography session of this panel, we kindly ask our role players to keep their cameras on and for everyone else to switch off theirs. Thank you very much. We will push on with the last session of today's proceedings. The last session will focus on the subject of SMEs in driving innovation in the new digital age. Mr. Sharat Kutan from Asrawani will be navigating this session. Mr. Sharat, the space is yours.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation. As anchor for current affairs show on Asrawani, I occasionally have a chance to deal with this issue of SMEs and the new digital age. Let me just say from the onset, before I introduce the discussants, who will have about 15 minutes to make their own presentation or intervention, their thoughts really to animate the discussion among the participants, is to say that, like so much in Malaysian life, this is yet another topic riddled with cliches. I would have rewritten the title, perhaps, dragging SMEs kicking and screaming into the new digital age by government, just because, it seems like there's a lot of push coming from government, recognizing the centrality of SMEs. This is not necessarily shared by all SMEs, and we need to disaggregate that notion of SMEs. What kind of SMEs are we talking about? Those that are motivated by, as good capitalist enterprises, by the bottom line to, in fact, adopt these new technologies and maybe be at the cutting edge of innovation, and those that are just not, and who don't have incentives, and who are, for whatever reason, either quite satisfied in their niche and the ways they've done things for the last 20 years, or were still are really on the cusp of shutting down at this point in time, and because of the crisis and their own internal contradictions. So yeah, so let me just say, I think it's one of those topics that could be consist of a lot of motherhood statements. And let's try to get beyond that if possible. We have this morning Mr. Mohandan Karamapule, who's the director of the Business Digital Adoption Division, I guess, of MDEC. We have Ms. Sharifa Najwa Said Abdul Bakar, Chief Officer of the Knowledge Management and Strategy Division of SME Corporation Malaysia, and Dr. Manzoor Rahman, who's a Director of Marketing, Customer Experience and Innovation at Axiata. So these three people will begin the evening. I'll just take them in order that they've been given to me. So we'll start with Mohandan, and then Sharifa, and then Manzoor, if that's okay. And perhaps, we'll keep it to 10-15 minutes at the most, because that will probably be most enabling of a lively discussion later. That's probably what will drive this conversation. So thank you again, all three of you, for helping animate this conversation. Can I invite Mr. Mohandan, please?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Sharat, and very good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I love the way, Sharat, how you started it. Yes, let's try to avoid a lot of the motherhood statement and get to the point straight. I'm pretty excited to discuss this and to also hear views from everyone. I think my view, and I think probably my colleagues from SME Corp will also agree, is that yes, Sharat, you're right. There's a lot of incentives and benefits, I would say, opportunities as well, given by the government. And today it's not just from the government as well as from the private sectors. We are seeing telcos and banks also coming in, joining the bandwagon to see how they can provide different types of opportunities, yeah, and services. But if you take a step back, you would see that from an SME digitalization, SME themselves, as we know, covers basically the largest chunk of businesses in the country, and also from the job opportunity. But we do see that from a digital adoption, transformation, it is taking quite a bit of time. There could be multiple reasons behind this, but what we can see is that from the first thing that we see, I would say it's actually from the mindset perspective. Even you look at it from a regional perspective, we are slightly lagging behind in terms of adopting digital. But if you look at Malaysia itself, we've been an industrialized country for a long time. We have access to a lot of technological advances. We do have specific talents who have also been exposed to this. But when it comes to the SMEs, we see that it's taking a bit of time for them to embrace this. And there's a lot of fear behind it. I particularly have started quite a number of initiatives for the last 4 or 5 years, working with quite a number of businesses, particularly the manufacturing sector, for example. And what I see is that when I say fear, it's basically in terms of they do understand the impact of digital, but however, they do not know how to embark on digital. So the fear comes from the type of things that they can start off with, right? How do they kickstart? And one. The second is that they've also been exposed to quite a lot of technological, softwares and hardwares. They have invested in some of this much, much earlier. However, perhaps from the return of investment, that has been a bit of a challenge for them. And therefore then, they do not see adopting digital as something which actually helps them to grow, but rather just an operational expenses. So that's the second thing we see. The third one that we see is basically from a talent perspective. Again, for SMEs who are pretty small in size, and probably the same individual will be running or doing more than one job function, having someone to actually look into digital might be a little difficult. One. Second is also the talent, the skills needed in digital may not be there as well. So there's a lot of fear when it comes to adoption when they do not have what I call the lieutenants of the founder, of the CEO, who probably are not ready to actually embark on this. The last one that we see, which comes very strongly as well, is actually in terms of the complexity of technology. This is because technology changes on a day-to-day basis. What is relevant today may not be relevant in just a couple of months' time. Therefore, for a traditional business, non-tech organization, this becomes very daunting. So for example, a lot of conversation in the ecosystem is about big data, blockchain, IoT. Unfortunately, these are not business languages. Therefore, for SMEs, they do not understand how this technology could actually impact them. And most importantly, how does it help them in terms of improving their bottom line? That's pretty clear. But they are also at the same time, and I would say because of the current pandemic, digitalization has been accelerated tremendously. We are seeing a new group of SMEs coming forward and wanting to actually embrace digital. These are not the companies that we have been touching base with for the past couple of years, but rather I would say another 20 to 30% up in terms of SMEs coming forward, trying to figure out how digital can support them, primarily for one reason, which is actually in terms of how can they continue their business, right? So the conversation today among the SMEs is no longer about going into a new market or trying to create new business model with digital, but rather how can I continue my business today? What is lacking today is I can't contact my customers, for example, right? I've been cut off because of the movement control. The second part is my sales are down because I can't actually have a connection with all these different customers out there. And the third one is because my cash flow is also pretty badly impacted because I still have a lot of costs. My operational cost is there. I still have to pay salary. I still have to pay for my rental and whatever not, but then there's no money coming in. So today, what we see is that we're actually working with a number of SMEs to help them to improve, for example, their front end, as well as the mid and the back end. Yeah, when we say that, how do you engage your customers more effectively using digital? Many different tools there. Number two is how can you improve your processes better? For example, using HR services tools, or even e-procurement and e-payment tools, whereby you can cut off some of the traditional way of doing business. You can improve time. Second is you can also improve transparency. So my final point here I would say is that yes, we do have to do a bit of a crying and catching them, dragging them. But I think the pandemic today have actually helped quite a lot in terms of ensuring that they can get on track, and a lot of agencies out there like SME Corp and MDEC are actually ready to, and we have quite a number of initiatives I would love to share later in terms of how we're helping them. So back to you, Sharat. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, that was unmuted myself. Okay, so that was short and sweet and very compact. And yeah, I think it'd be great to hear, those initiatives. But again, the conversation seems to be dominated by one side saying we have all these initiatives. The real, contribution, I think, at this point in terms of conversation is what you pointed out, Muhyiddin, is the challenges, the mindset, the dissonance, the complexity of the technology. So yeah, so again, there's a willing partner. The groom is very excited. Well, let's turn the gender issue around. The bride's very excited. The groom's rather reluctant, it seems. So with that, let me ask Najwa for your contribution to the conversation. You can be expansive. We actually have until 12:10. So Muhyiddin was very concise. So he's given us even more time.
Right. Right. Thank you so much, Sharat. I always enjoy listening to you on BFM, so it's nice to have you moderate the session. For a start, I couldn't help smiling when you mentioned about let's be in touch with reality. Very true that even a few years ago, when the government, to begin with, innovation goes beyond digital. That's when I first look at the topic for discussion today, when we talk about innovation, because SME Corp is a central coordinating agency for SME development. So we are actually aware of the entire landscape, the entire industries, and the entire ecosystem, right? So we do notice that that there's a lot of programs available, as you rightly pointed out, and there are many types of SMEs out there. And when you talk about innovation, it starts from innovation in products and services that's provided, innovation in the area of business models, improvement of business models, and also innovation in terms of technology enablers for even traditional businesses, things like Airbnb and Grab. They are actually solution for traditional businesses of providing accommodation and logistic or services. So and as you rightly pointed out, the government have a lot of programs, and although that being said, we need to keep on repeating that that there are programs available. I have to promote the SME info portal, semeinfo.com.my, where there are about 211 programs for year 2020 alone, with an allocation of 13 billion over 17 ministries and 50 agencies. And about, hang on, let me see here. Okay, about 43 programs are actually dedicated for innovation and technology adoption. So, it's there, but as you said, the groom or bride or whoever, the entrepreneurs need to go. You can't just wait for the government to identify which program are good for you. You need to go and check it out and get in touch with us to find out more. Because, like Muhyiddin said just now, MDEC may be specializing in digitalization, for instance, but in SME Corp, we are actually in touch with the entire ecosystem. So come and see us, and we will, we have what we call SME competitive rating for enhancement to identify the area of strength and weaknesses and the kind of assistance that you actually need. So you can do it in a structured manner, but you need to understand that, you know, as entrepreneurs, you need to understand that investment in innovation, you know, R&D, it's an investment. It's not expenses. You don't just see it as a burden to the business. You know, it's not just money spent. It is, you know, it could be 10,000 spent to get those, you know, hundreds of thousands or even millions. Yeah, just spending on innovation that increase productivity. So. So actually my point is, we've got a structured way to assist SMEs, but you've got to step forward, you know, come forward and let us assist you in a structured manner. Decisions on what you want to embark on to improve your business is still up to you. As an entrepreneur, you know, you like to make decisions, but let us assist you to make a structured and informed decision based on facts. So that's why, you know, when you mentioned earlier about, you know, the government have been doing a lot, but I think government too, the government agencies too, need to understand from that's why when there are surveys and census, entrepreneurs need to take time also to respond to this surveys and census, because we're trying to understand you and provide the right solution, you know, or policies or whatever to assist you. Because as you, you know, when people often say, you know, quote that, you know, there's something wrong, you know, if the technology, be it the innovator or the creator of technology, as well as the technology uptake is rather slow in Malaysia. We do have, unfortunately, we do have figures to that as well. If we zoom to digitalization, yeah, as one area of innovation, right, we can see, I think Malaysia is well known that internet penetration, participation in social media, oh dear, 90%, you know, utilization in that sense. So we're known to use technology for that purpose, you know, for social media, etc. To an extent, you know, some business as well, but we know that utilization of technology that increase productivity is actually, you know, in the, that's the front end, the social media part, the marketing, etc. But that cannot solve world hunger, that cannot solve all the business problems. So we need to also be aware that the higher productivity, or rather, higher return for investment would be if you also adopt or leverage technology in the area of front end of business process, you know, to really not just general social media, but for e-commerce, for promotion, marketing, as well as the back end business process, you know, things like finance, accounting, inventory, CRM, you know, ERP, yeah, all those solutions. But you can see that we have figures from our work with Huawei, the white paper on SME digitalization. We've have it in facts and figures that despite the fact that we have embraced computerization, but digitalization is still a struggle. The front end, we have high percentage of utilization for the front end, you know, the light use of social media, but at the back end, you know, that really can influence productivity, that can really improve your business, put your finances, you know, in order for you to be able to access finance for further expansion, etc. Those stands about, you know, for finance and accounting, about 50% utilization. For CRM, you know, customer relation management and things like that, about 12 and 11% of the SMEs using it as such. You see, so that's a long way to go. The technology are available, the assistance to subscribe to the technology are available. So as you rightly pointed out, now the bride and groom, you know, let's not be sexist here, both, you know, they just need to come forward and subscribe to make use of all these facilities. So I would like to repeat again, the portal to go is smeinfo.com.my, yeah, in Malaysia. You can sort through the programs that we have clustered into access to financing, because, well, whatever solution that you want, let's be frank, that it would need financing, and usually financing would be the focus areas that have the highest allocation from the government, so that you can use this finances to finance various activities, business activities, innovation and technology adoption included. You know, there's human capital development area of, programs for human capital development, access to market, yeah, and infrastructure as well. So go check out the SME info portal. On a second note is that, you know, upon being hit by COVID, it's true what Mohandan said, among the, in fact, the highest area of business disruption was actually the first and foremost was the cash flow, impact on cash flow. That's why among the earliest intervention was, you know, to actually provide moratorium, etc., to allow them to hang on to the cash that they have while they have access or apply for other assistance. But we are also talking about sustainability. How long can you go on giving wage subsidy, etc.? Wage subsidy, you know, when the government disburse the wage subsidy, etc., it's like there's no guarantee of getting something in return, or productive subsidization in that sense. Yeah, so it will be meaningful. You know, these are among the recommendations that SME Corp has put forward to the Economic Action Council, would be to create multiplier effect in the economy. Through the incentives that we give. Therefore, the government don't have to do everything. Should we have, IT expert, like government IT expert throughout the nation? Not really. We may want to explore on the concept of economic gardening, for instance, you know, whereby empower the innovative private sector to empower the other SMEs. So we have actually tried this through programs like Micro Connector under SME Corp, where we partner with others as well. You know, MDEC have developed quite a number of technology providers, for instance, that can empower the micro enterprises. So what happened is, under the Micro Connector program, we actually help this company that have innovative solutions to actually get subscription for their services. So in one way, we create demand for the locally developed technology. And secondly, we empower many more SMEs, including the micro enterprises, to actually subscribe to a technology that can increase productivity, increase their sales, etc. One example is Yeza. Yeza is, it's actually developed by an Enterprise 50 tourism company. The company is actually in tourism, and, you know, once COVID hit, they were badly disrupted. Yeah, travel and tours. Yeah, so they were badly hit. So instead of just remaining complacent, so this is the difference of among, you know, the innovative companies. Although they are from tourism, when they are being hit, instead of just waiting for wage subsidy, etc., they actually pivot the business to actually commercialize the procurement and the e-commerce internal process that we have, and commercialize that to become a WhatsApp commerce platform, which is very user friendly. You can go, you can have social media platform to market your product and do the e-commerce transaction, e-payment, etc., by just using handphone. They don't even need laptop, you see, and this is a locally developed technology. So when we provide demand, when we create demand, yeah, we use the database of SMEs in our SME Corp database to actually create awareness for this technology and provide some subsidy for the entrepreneurs, especially the micro entrepreneurs in this case, to subscribe to the platform. So Yeza get business, by way of subscription to their technology, and the micro enterprises are empowered. So these are just one of the service providers under our Micro Connector program. There are a few others, that also provide different kind of technology in the area of, all sorts of businesses, even sewing. Yeah, it's not just about teaching the technique of sewing, but using technology to produce high quality products and how to market subsequent to that. So it's a holistic intervention. I suppose I'll stop at that first, you know, and I'll be happy to add to it later. Thank you.
To learn to unmute myself. Okay, thank you again for that. It's a very rich discussion. Just to remind ourselves that, you know, of who's in the room. On this panel, we have, you know, MDEC and SME Corp, both government institutions. And now we're going to have somebody speak from Axiata. And I understand Axiata is, what, 60% owned by Khazanah? So it's really very heavily, it's like the relatives of the groom are all here. They're very excited about this arranged marriage. It's not so clear whether the bride is anywhere around, or even, you know, some people interested to protect the rights of the bride. I mean, if you like to put it that way, but we can reverse it, as I said, just to keep the gender neutrality going. I must say that, you know, it seems like a very, maybe a symptom of the kind of market or capitalist, you know, structures that we have here, that, you know, government is so heavily involved in pushing innovation. The question is, you know, where are the industry players in this, and what is it they're thinking about? And there are different types of industry players that that I've been alerted to in my discussions with people helping out the National Productivity Corporation, that, you know, when it comes to SMEs that are linked up with MNCs, with the big players in the global economy, there is incentives that, because they are kind of constantly playing catch up with and providing services. But there's a huge part of the SME ecosystem that is very much internal domestic. What we were told on this show we did a couple of weeks ago was that these companies had success very early on, and they have also become quite complacent. So, these are the companies that might in fact not survive this pandemic. So the disaggregating of what the SMEs are is, I think, very much needed in this conversation. But having said that, we'll invite Axiata, Director of Marketing, Customer Experience and Innovation, Manzoor Rahman, to kind of take this conversation further. Manzoor, are you with us?
Yes, right here.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharad, and the Institute for having me. Very good evening from Washington. It's about 10:30 in the evening here. Great points, Mohandan and Sharifa. There's not a whole lot I can add to what you're saying, so I thought maybe I'd take a slightly different approach to this topic. I want to talk about three stories that I just kind of thought of right now. Three stories about reflecting on change and adopting change. The first one is about my son. I have a high school going 16-year-old at home. And for the longest time, I couldn't get him to really get into the habit of reading and writing. Those are the two things that he did not believe much in. And children these days, they do all the homework on laptops. So the whole habit and practice of actually holding a pen, and they've seen, research has shown that nowadays elementary school children are having very poor handwriting because their motor skills haven't developed enough to grasp a pen. From the age of 6 months onward, they start using touch screens and they're swiping, and so children have come to that point where they are not fond of writing or reading. And when it comes to reading, their attention span is so limited, they can only read 160 characters, and they'll quickly move on to the next thing. And so there's also a lot of talk about outsourcing of decisions. So before, if we wanted to buy a book to read, we would go to a library or a bookstore. There was a time when Barnes and Noble was a big deal in the US. Not anymore, because Kindle is going to tell you what to read. You don't, and they'll recommend your reading list, and you just outsource that decision and decide to just hand it over to Kindle to tell you what to read. And so I had been struggling a little bit observing my children, and especially my eldest, and trying to get him to read, and I couldn't. until he told me that he wants to try out taking drama because he's interested in, he's reached a good height. He's about 6'1" now. He loves the idea of acting. And he said, Dad, if you let me get into the profession of pursuing acting as a profession, I'd be very happy. And I said, of course, you can do what you want in life. And he said, but I want to go about doing it the right way. So I want to take drama. And I let him. And his first semester was a horrible mess because his professor had given him a lot of reading to do. And that's not what he likes to do. But what is important for him was to do well in his drama class. And he said, I'm not a quitter. And I really want to get this right. And it turned out that he finished, top of his class, straight A's, for the next few months. And he ended the year as the top drama student. He's also come out of the kind of the ambition to act anymore, but nevertheless, what it's done for him is that he has become an avid reader. So I'm just going to park that example for a minute and maybe come to the second story that I remembered now. Back in 2007, I've been working for telecoms companies for the last almost 20 years. And in 2007, I was manager for the BlackBerry product for Telenor, which is the Norwegian telecoms operator. And I was managing BlackBerry across the sale of BlackBerry devices and services across 23 countries. So when the iPhone was released and I was given a sample, I was expected to use that for a couple of weeks to try it out and decide if we want to order some, and et cetera. And I said, this I think is a B2C product. I'm not much interested in this for the time being because it just looks more like a toy, something like my kids would use. And most importantly, in the B2B segment where I was mostly busy with, I saw no future for a phone with no physical keyboard. And I wrote it off. And I said, this is no place in the B2B sector. So I'll just hand this over to my colleague who's looking at the B2C market. And many people came up to me in the office and they said, hey, this has got really good apps. And I said, BlackBerry's going to achieve the same thing. But at the end of the day, I've got serious work to do and serious emails are going to need a physical keyboard. We all know, how that turned out, after some 13 years. So I'm not even going to get into the embarrassing details, but third story, my mother, who is 74 years old, I've been trying, her eldest son is a telecoms executive for the last 2 decades. I've been trying for the last 20 years to get her to use technology. Mom, can you please FaceTime? I'm in DC. I usually live in Malaysia. I just moved here during the summer and did not go back to KL yet. And my mom's in New York. And I said, can we FaceTime? And she's like, no. I've got a telephone next to my couch and that's where you're going to call me. And that's how it's been for the last 20 years. She has a cell phone and she just has 3 numbers on her speed dial for her 3 kids. And that's all she does. She will do voice call until March of 2020. And you guys know what happened in March of 2020. Suddenly she can't see us anymore. And 30 days pass and she calls me and says, hey, Manzur, how do I see you guys on video? I really miss my grandkids and my kids. And I got Mom to download WhatsApp. First, I had to order an iPhone and have that delivered to her place. She was thrilled. Walked her and talked her through the steps. She managed. She's a retired professor. Yeah, she managed. She's not dumb. And she was absolutely thrilled the first day she saw us. And now that has become the modus operandi. We cannot not FaceTime, no matter where. I have to tell my mom, look, I'm driving. She's like, no, I want to see you. So that's story number 3. So the kind of the takeaway from story number 1 is, which was for my son's drama class, was that sometimes you need a substitute method to learn. And I've been telling him for 10 years, please start reading. I've shared many anecdotes, showed him all the different reasons why he has to read, gave him biographies of Steve Jobs, etc., all of who were avid readers, about Jeff Bezos. Didn't matter. Only because he wanted to do drama is because he picked up the habit of reading and now he reads, Second example of my iPhone rejection story. Well, when push comes to shove, I will adopt an iPhone. Today, I'm a happy user of all touchscreen products. But I think back to 13 years ago, I wrote it off. I did not think this was going to happen. But you know, now I have no option. I don't even think there are any physical keyboard phones out there any longer. And number three, with my mom's story is, when you know what's at stake, you will overcome. For my mother, she was worried given her age and everything and health complications, she might not make it this year. In fact, she has actually survived COVID. She did test positive last month and she's okay. But she feared this and she said, I got to see my kids at least. So that emotion, and when you know what's at stake, change is easy to bring about. So realizing that adoption of change and taking some positive steps toward that is so much more a psychological issue than really about literacy or any of that. Is I think was the most important realization. There's a book now on the New York Times bestseller list. It's the Post-Corona. I think it's called, the subtitle is Crisis to Opportunities, by the famed NYU professor Scott Galloway. And I think in the early chapters, he talks about the great acceleration. I think there's a quote that goes something like, nothing can happen for decades, but then decades can happen in weeks. And he talks about, he sets the premise of his book, and it kind of talks about how Corona had accelerated what would have happened anyway. Now, when March 16 came around in this year in Kuala Lumpur, and we had been anticipating something like this is going to happen, the UN announces a pandemic, and we know we're probably going to get into a lockdown. That's when my team and I, we got together and we understood this is it. It's not about what's going to happen right now, but it's about what's going to happen this time next year. And what are people going to remember? And what is this storm that we're going to go through? And what is the aftermath of the storm that we're going to look at? That's what we spent a few weeks just discussing, just write down the aftermath. If nobody does anything, and did you know this hurricane was coming, what is the, what is it going to look like? What damage is it going to leave behind? And so then can we kind of walk backwards and decide what we want to do? And also understanding that, so I'm the CMO at Aspirasi, which is the latest startup at Axiata Digital, even though we're traditionally a telecoms company, but we've moved into other adjacencies and we're now strongly pursuing digital financial services. So I've also personally moved on from telecoms to fintech. But then my area of responsibility is around customer growth and user adoption. So I'm looking after both marketing, growth, and customer experience. And the real question was, we've got all these great microfinancing solutions for SMEs and all those cliches that Sharad kind of beautifully set and Mohandan talked about. But those are absolutely true. And we said, we have all of this, but how are we going to cross the chasm? How do we, leap forward and overcome all those hurdles that I had when it came to the iPhone, my mom had with FaceTiming, and my son had with reading. And so despite being a fintech, we actually hired, majority of our team members in my growth team are actually social scientists. So we have anthropologists, who is our head of brand. We have social psychologists, we have psychologists. Very few people who actually have a marketing background. I have a marketing background. I figured I can guide them and they can learn the rest. And very few people who have technology backgrounds, because especially within marketing, the whole idea was don't find people who actually know technology, because if they don't ride that change curve, they won't know how to convince somebody else. And so what we did was, back in March, we got together and we understood that we need to lay this story in such a way that it'll be easier for people to swallow the pill. They'll understand that this crisis is a crisis, and in it there's an opportunity to rise above. And we're not here to sell microfinancing or digital financing. The word digital is scary. So we said, take out the word digital from everywhere. And we're here to talk about, saving your business, saving your livelihood, focus on your family, understand what it's going to be. And it just became easier because of Corona, because there's a call for urgency. So obviously there's a call to action, and people responded to that, but they responded very positively to our message because it is crafted by social scientists who understand how to deliver that message. So what we did in March was Exiata Group, our parent group, partnered with the government and launched a $35 million, which roughly is about 150 million ringgit, microfinancing program. And but when we're about to launch it, we realized that we don't have a 100% digital solution to deliver that. So we spent a couple of weeks, I think it was like 13 days, to put together an unprecedented 100% digital 3-minute journey. It's 3 minutes when you and I try to do it. It's 3 days when the SME tries to do it. The first day goes in simply trying to convince them to click on the link in their email, which they barely ever open, unless their son or their daughter shows them how to open that email. This is the state of affairs with our SMEs. You have better luck by sending them an SMS, which you and I wouldn't open because of fears of spamming, or it could be some sort of a phishing, hacking text, scam text. But you have better chances with them if you actually send them a text instead of an email. And so we realized that this is a 3-minute journey that's super easy. It's all online, and yet people are struggling. It's taking them 72 hours just to get through that journey. And in the early days, we saw that we were not picking up speed. 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by. There's a fantastic there's a 6-month moratorium on this loan. It's a minimal rate, interest rate. It's a Sharia compliant, and so it's a profit rate on it, and it's minimal. And it's so easy to get it. And you have to give 0 collaterals. You don't have to provide anything except your name and your ID number. And we will do the online credit scoring and provide you the loan in 48 hours. The next few months, what we decided was we need to focus on a very different kind of an approach. It's not going to work if I just simply tell them, apply for a digital loan. So that brings me kind of maybe to the final story. Some 15 years ago, Pampers, the US diaper manufacturer, was having a lot of trouble selling diapers and competing with cheap diapers. And after a long research, they realized that they can't simply tell parents that this is the best diaper because every other diaper company is telling them that same thing. And also, there's a big challenge of selling diapers to your actual users, which is the baby. The best that a baby can tell you if they're happy or not with the diapers is they stop crying. And so how much more customer feedback are you going to get on diapers? And so instead of focusing on babies, they decided to focus on mothers. And Pampers went out and developed a very sophisticated portal and platform for moms. These are moms to be, for prenatal care. They can log in and they can find out what do they need to take and what do they need to consume in order for the baby to grow healthily. And then, during their pregnancy in the first, second trimester, third trimesters, what is appropriate, and then postnatal care. So very sophisticated. And the only time that diapers come into the discussion is where the mother has a color chart to compare the appearance of the baby's feces to determine the baby's gastro health. And the mother could understand, looking at the color and the consistency, whether the proper diet is being offered to the baby or not. The point of this is that there was a different approach that Pampers had taken in order to get to the babies, and it's to the mother. And ultimately, Pampers, that is a very famous case study, and there's very successful for Pampers. We reversed that. We understood from a long time ago that SMEs have digital literacy issues, and they will have adoption challenges. But we also know that most SME owners are adults, and a lot of them are senior citizens who have grown-up children, who are millennials or Gen X or even Gen Z children. And so we reversed the Pampers model and we decided to focus on the children and reaching out to them via digital media, not to our direct SMEs, and explaining to them what this digital financing is about, how easy it is, why we're credible, this is an easy technology for adoption. And then we went out and started incentivizing the children. So we launched a completely separate venture called Kongsi Club. For those of you who speak Malaysian, you know that Kongsi is basically our slang word for sharing. So Kongsi Club is, you can check it out, kongsiclub.co. And it's basically a secondary market where we recruit recruiters. So it's a referral program, or some people might call it a multi-level marketing program, but we think it's unique in that it's not a loyalty or a one-time program where we give incentives for referring somebody. Instead, we are actively establishing a connection with the millennials of Malaysia, reaching out to them and providing them with a sustainable source of income in order to motivate them and so that they can go out and reach out to non-digitally savvy SMEs who might be their neighbors, their neighborhood mom and pop store owner, or their parents or grandparents or uncles, aunts, or any person who might need this, and show them how to do it, teach them, help them get through the application process. And then in that process of our end customer getting that, our recruiter manages to earn a very handsome profit. So much so that now we have a pretty large growing body of recruiters for whom this has become if not a secondary source of income, even a primary source of income for some, because they lost their jobs during COVID. Might seem petty on the outside, but if you think about it, it's having a tremendous effect. Today, this is our largest channel now that is having a viral effect on growth. And what we're doing is, yes.
Sorry, just watch the time. I give you a minute to wrap up, and then you can, when questions come, you can continue.
Sure. So today that particular channel has grown to be our largest contributor and highest growth rate. And as a result, what it does, it allows the SMEs to become digitally savvy by using our product. What they needed was financing. They did not need fancy AI and machine learning or any other fancy tech fad. What they needed was real solution to their real problem, contemporary problems. But these solutions happen to come digitally, and at least at Esperasi, we figured out one way of trying to close that literacy gap to try to help them cross that bridge. And I think that is what is going to make a change ultimately for SME adoption, technology adoption. We also, if you look at companies like Amazon in the United States, how they're expanding, I think they're changing the whole landscape for how technology adoption is going to work, which is why the future SMEs will need to brace for shifts in their business models in order to coexist with these large growing companies that will actually shape the future of SME and technology adoption.
Right. Is that, Manzar, is that it?
Yep.
Oh, great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Manzar. And, and also bringing up some really important points that perhaps missing in the discussion that social scientists are attentive to, as you noted. And, just to come back to that conversation I had about how many of these SMEs in Malaysia had success very early and have been riding on that and work within a domestic ecosystem that doesn't really demand that they change. They also have succession issues. So you mentioned children, their children, actually not interested to carry on the business. And so you have a real problem. They don't know what the next, who to hand the baton to, and they're not going to professionalize. So then what? There's another issue with SMEs, and that is, in their minds, as businessmen and entrepreneurs, productivity isn't linked, or profitability isn't linked to productivity necessarily. And so keeping your costs low is really their business strategy. So, you know, so you have, and it seems that a lot of the discussion doesn't get to that reality. We don't actually know enough about who it is we're trying to kind of drag kicking and screaming to this oasis that waits, you know, 21st century oasis that apparently awaits them. So, okay, I'll leave it at that. There aren't any questions from the floor as yet. So in the remaining 15 minutes they have, I thought I would ask Najwa, since you're with the with SME Corp, is to help us understand who should we just forget about. I mean, it sounds harsh. I mean, who's just never going to adopt and is going to die, or just going to be, you know, limping along for the next couple of decades until they perish? And then who's it that we really should be focused on when we talk about change, where it's actually going to happen? I know in Malaysia we try to be nice all the time, so it's very hard to have a real conversation. But tell us, who's really the past and who's the future when it comes to SMEs?
Right. As I mentioned earlier, I think MDEC did an interesting paper that was presented to the Economic Action Council sometime last month, I think. That, you know, where again, this is limited to digitalization, yeah, whereas, I mean, I'm mindful that innovation goes beyond digitalization, but just taking example, and that when they did a paper for the EAC, because, you know, if you recall this aggressive journey by the government peaked during the Digital Free Trade Zone promotion, the FTZ, and, you know, it's like at some point I was, you know, I was feeling like, God, if government, you know, government just get into business, probably they will. I mean, it's so hard to get people on board. We, according to our last survey, despite awareness, yeah, awareness level is high, quite high, 65%. So if you ask me, who should we, not to say forget, but leave them, you know, until they get some realization, hopefully, you know, from the Manzoor's soldiers of youth soldiers, you know, to help create awareness for them. There are 65% of SMEs here from our survey who are aware that they need to do something. They need to adopt technology, but only 35% then went on to do something about it. Okay, so this generally, you know, you can see that, okay, out of 100%, there's 60, those outside the 65% are really someone that you have to focus on, you know, there's a mindset issue there, okay?
So can I draw Mundan in now? I mean, could you say something to that precise question?
Yeah, sure. I think there are multiple views to this. Why I'm saying that is because when you look at SMEs, they're pretty broad, yeah, in terms of what they provide, product, services, and you can also cut them, slice and dice them with different sectors as well. So there are some sectors who have really benefited from the current pandemic, for example. You look at the logistics, the F&B, retail to a certain extent, those SMEs who have figured out a way to be on digital have actually flourished, right? Look at Panjana's initiative, which MDEC worked on the e-commerce campaign. There were like almost 1.2 billion sales generated just by the time, you know, we launched it in somewhere in August or just after that. And these were all primarily, all of them are SMEs who have figured out a way to put their products and services online. So those are the good ones. But at the same time, you have sectors like manufacturing, tourism, agriculture. I guess this, you know, they've not really figured out. There are opportunities there. Perhaps there are some outliers, but they've not really figured out the opportunities out there. And I think this is where the balance comes. So you'll hear one story saying that, yeah, there are pretty good number of SMEs who have really benefited digital, doing very well, now looking at new models. But at the same time, you have this other group of SMEs who are the ones that I think even like MDEC and SME Corp would want to support and help them to see how they can also benefit from this.
Mansa, if I can ask you to join us, for a lot of lay people like myself, we talk about digitalization, we think about digital marketing. That's always the kind of first thing. But again, in this conversation we had, it seems that when it comes to manufacturers, you know, they might have bought the hardware, but they don't actually use the numbers that are generated by the machine. So you have kind of reasonably sophisticated machines that are underutilized because decisions at a manufacturing, a process, operational level isn't data driven. And the idea of data driving business, data driving decision, it seems a huge leap for many in the SME. I mean, could you speak to that?
Absolutely, yes, sure. And what we see is, again, data driving, another cliche, and the reason, it's probably the biggest reason why they are not data driven, or that data adoption hasn't happened, is because they have not addressed processes at scale. And so in simple terms, they're still going about doing business the way they used to. We talk about data driving, and we took a heartfelt look at ourselves and completely rechart, how our management meetings went. What goes into a presentation? If we look at case studies of the top data-driven companies, they don't do PowerPoint presentations anymore. They have real-time presentation updates. That means nobody sits and prepares something to show management. It's happening every day on dashboards. So what kind of dashboards are you looking at? And what's happening is, traditionally, in manufacturing companies, their owners, they have a certain way of, they've reached a certain level of achievement and success. And it's very difficult to show them another way to manage. It's really that more than anything else. And ultimately, when you talk about process re-engineering, it means turning everything upside down. And the biggest resistance is going to come from the owners and from the board. That why would you do that? So in other words, I'm completely okay with all your dashboards, but can I please get my monthly report printed out and placed on my desk so I can read the paper printout? So for as long as that exists, you're not going to achieve that data drivenness.
Manzar, I'm assuming you're American or American based, that's where you're from. Do you think this conversation is odd in that it's government driving entrepreneurs to do this? That the change is not coming from the market, from, the thing, I think it's called capitalism, and capitalism doesn't need government in some sense, perhaps some enabling structures. But do you think this is an odd way that we are coming to this conversation?
Yes and no. I mean, you somewhere early in the conversation mentioned how, SMEs are the backbone of the economy. Some 60+% of the Malaysian economy is based on SMEs. And so for the government, is that example, my 3 stories, and I talked about number 2 for me was when push comes to shove. And so governments are recognizing that there's so much more we could do, and how are we going to depend, our GDP depends on this, our growth of our economy depends on this, our unemployment levels depends on this. And so unless we support and somehow push this, but government has rarely ever succeeded in generally bringing about, adoptions and changes like this. Ultimately, you look at, for example, we talk about technology adoption. The things that define technology adoption today are things like, do you have a smartphone? When we're doing statistics and we're trying to find out what percentage of them use a smartphone, what percentage of them are doing digital marketing. All of this is driven by smartphone technology, which is all driven by the private sector. Had Steve Jobs not had the courage to develop something like the iPhone and say the customer doesn't know what they want, I know what they want, this wouldn't have happened. I think if we look at, for example, aspirasi, it is very interesting. On the time that we actually came up with our flagship product of the time before the pandemic, which is our Aspirasi Assist, our free financing, we actually got a call from the Prime Minister's Executive Council. Our chairman was sitting there. He WhatsApps us, he texts us and he says, can you guys put together an online loan program by next week? And of course, the answer that we have to give is yes. And then we figure out, how do we do this by next week? But we already said yes. And, the Prime Minister was told. So then that two evenings later, the Prime Minister is addressing the nation about the lockdown. And he slips in also, and there is going to be this 150 million ringgit loan program from Aspirasi and Axiata. And that's when we knew that's kind of our, either order your tombstones or figure out, how you're going to get this out. And so, but obviously this was our business. This was that opportunity that Scott Galloway is talking about, saying that the great acceleration. All we told ourselves was, this is what aspiracy is about, and the growth that we would have thought we would get in the next 2 years is going to happen in the next 6 months, and we have to rise to the occasion. And a lot of that, during that period, and it's very difficult being in that lockdown, was to reflect and see what kind of skill sets do we have to be able. That's where we talked about the social scientists and all those other issues. So government alone cannot do it, but obviously government plays such a huge role. And I'm not surprised that the government makes an attempt to try to push this.
If I may add, Sharad.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. So for all of you, just kind of closing statements, I guess.
So yeah, I think since there's a lot of discussion that revolves around government's role, I think this is my view. I think government's role, aside from what Mansoor mentioned, which I completely agree with him, is also to look at how they can lift some of the barriers of adoption. That could come from the policy intervention, that could come from how we bring in private sectors to be part and parcel of this. So that's really crucial. If you can see from an innovation standpoint, Ministry of Science and Technology has come up with sandboxes, for example. Introduction of drone technology to the agriculture, it's so super crucial, right? And that can be done very quickly and is very cost effective, helps the productivity yield as well. But sometimes the regulatory requirements may be a bit of a challenge. So I think that's one, which is what PEMDEC does as well. And a lot of things that we do is as well in terms of, how do we help SMEs to kickstart their journey? It is not just to provide them with, a fish, but rather help them how to fish. That's where government plays an important role. And that is where government should only be part of the kicking start of the journey and not to sponsor the entire journey. I think that's obviously wrong. So some of the things that we do.
Yeah, sorry, I love that Christian parable. It's been, this is.
I know it's overused.
Yes, okay, I do want to, okay, sorry, we're running out of time. So I'm going to ask Juwita to tell us, there were actually questions that came in, but to her, not in the chat box. So Juwita, would you like just for your benefit, so that, Mansoor, Najwa, and Mundan, you'd know that people were listening and they did have questions. So Juwita, do you want to just sort of tell us what those questions were?
Thank you, Sharad. We had questions from the next gen, and I'm going to bucket, just put it in buckets.
Yeah, you have exactly 3 minutes to accomplish this task.
They were asking about technological adoption among SMEs. What are the biggest challenges for them to adopt? And if some were to adopt and some were not to adopt the innovations and the technologies, then it will contribute to societal divide. What is the take from the panel on these questions? Thanks.
Oh, so very nice summary. So digital divide, who's going to lose, who the losers and winners, those are going to perish. Okay, we have exactly 2 minutes. Najwa, I'm going to ask you perhaps your summing up for the conversation. Your mic is not on.
Right, keep on forgetting to unmute myself. Okay, interesting enough, we actually also captured that in our survey, because trying to understand, after the FTZ and everything, but the uptake is still quite low. So when we asked the entrepreneurs, on the ground, thousands of them, the answer is simply, about 20% of them simply said that they just prefer the old way of doing business. So this goes back to, a few of our earlier argument whereby when there's no necessity, people become complacent. But that's why COVID maybe is more effective than government had been in promoting technology adoption, because it make it a necessity, you see. And then a staggering 60% feel that there's no necessity. I mean, I can survive without it. There's no necessity for me to spend on this new technology because the thing I have is still working, you see. So that is quite worrying, to show, as you said, to link performance, profitability to productivity. That awareness, when we have awareness session, it's the same people who come probably. So we can have not been able to reach out to those who do not have the awareness. That's why I thought, although Mansoor said it's petty, it's not. I don't think getting those youngsters as the change agent as Patty. I think it's smart. It not only solve the problem of syndicating awareness, but also it solved the problem of unemployed graduates, etc. I think it's an excellent move. So that's why actually SME Corp, we've also been working with Axiata to promote Aspirasi actually, and we've seen quite rapid take up based on that promotion. And I keep on reminding my team to, keep on actually promoting that facility. So because whenever people complain that banks are slow, hey, these are other alternatives for you, you see. So technology have enabled us as a central coordinating agency to actually provide alternatives that, increase efficiency as well. And to hopefully encourage them to take up technology.
Right, I hate to cut you off, and waiting for the fisticuffs and some contentious issues. They haven't quite come up, but I think you all seem to be on the same page. Thank you very much, all of you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I guess people can get in touch with you separately. I'd just like to thank again Muhundan, Sharifa Najwa, and Manzar Rahman for being with us this morning. And I'll hand the proceedings back to Juwita. I don't know who do I hand it back to.
Right. And thank you to our fellow speakers for a very informative and also a very lively session. Thank you so much. May I now invite Mr. Herizal Hazri to deliver the closing remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Good afternoon and good morning, good evening. I'm not entirely sure what it is because everyone's everywhere. Thank you very much for this wonderful 2 days sessions. To everyone who has participated and cared to join us, I think we've had really wonderful conversations, discussions, ideas has been put forward. I'm given this task to close the event, and I believe this possibly not supposed to make any substantial contribution, but really to just let you go and close this event and call it a success. But I can't stop myself from saying that, this is really interesting that we are all here talking about some of the challenges that we have and the challenges possibly moving forward. And the theme obviously has been COVID-19 and how do we deal with, possibly as well as during and post-pandemic. But some of these things that we have discussed about has been, decade-long sort of issues, development questions that have been posed to us for a very long time, right? Well, today it is being presented in the case of the pandemic and post-pandemic, and in the future it will possibly be presented again in the case of something else. Now, what is clear is that we have tried very hard, I think, to try and find solutions to move forward for a more equitable, just economy, as well as sustainable as well. But unfortunately, I think we are still trying to find answers in many of these fronts. How does government get involved? Where do they stop? How do we promote people to be more resilient, for instance, or businesses to adopt the future thinking and the way forward? How do we remove barriers, so on and so forth? These questions has been around for a very long time. Now, I think, to say the least, if the pandemic has taught us something, really, we should even be more actively involved in giving feedbacks, trying to find a way forward. Now, I don't have all the answers. I know there's a lot of questions. But really, I think we are running out of time. I think the environment is telling us that we have to find other solutions, alternative solutions moving forward. I think the development sort of questions or issues that we have is really slapping us on the face and telling us whatever that we have designed is probably not enough, and we have to adopt new approaches, new technology, and we really have to care. And I think I've heard from a good number of people today that I think you really care. And the question is, how do we translate this and how do we move it forward? How do we get our government to respond to this? And really the goal is for us to have something that is equitably shared, wealth that is available for all. And really, I mean, this is my thing, and I don't want to sound a little bit cliche, but I think really the issue is how do we ensure that moving forward we are focusing on equalizing opportunities rather than equalizing results. So I think especially during the times of pandemic, governments come in with all these incentive packages and stuff like that because we are trying to solve the very real question of the now. People are losing jobs, and people need support and so on and so forth. But we cannot lose sight of what lies for the future. And that opportunity has to be made available, and we have to work very, very hard and very, very closely to remove barriers. And we have to really equalize this opportunity so that it is available, so that societies will be more resilient. And hopefully, if there is another crisis that will face us in the near future, we are a little bit more ready. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much to the moderators. Thank you very much to my colleagues at ISIS for pulling this together. And I've had a wonderful sort of 2 days listening to all the conversations. And I hope we can continue this in the future. Thank you very much, and Selamat Plenary.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite His Excellency Ambassador Suga, co-chair of the PECC Standing Committee, to deliver his closing remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Bazri, Don, Eduardo, and distinguished guests. In the past 2 days, we have hosted a very meaningful webinar on optimizing human potential towards a future of shared prosperity and sustainability in times of COVID-19. Representatives from the PECC member committees, member economies, have conducted in-depth discussions on economic repercussions of the COVID-19 crisis, assessment of the CPTPP and the future of RCEP, solution to climate change, youth unemployment in the Asia-Pacific, digital economy, and inclusive society, SMEs in driving innovation in the new digital age, and we have reached very good understandings and consensus. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 decades and more, Asia-Pacific economic integration has kept deepening and made substantial progress. Asia-Pacific has become a leading and the most dynamic powerhouse of global economy, playing an active role in building an open world economy, upholding the multilateral trading system, and spearheading economic globalization. The economies of the Asia-Pacific have formed a community of shared future. The sudden COVID-19 pandemic has brought unprecedented threats to the lives and health of peoples in the Asia-Pacific region, severely disrupting normal international trade activities, hindering the cross-border flow of goods and services, and damaging supply chains, industrial chains, and value chains. So the challenges have been unprecedented. There is a Chinese saying, warm and cold we share together. The profound lesson and experience gained from this pandemic is In the era of globalization, lives and the future of all members of the global village are closely interconnected. All Asia-Pacific economies need to act in the spirit of partnership and get through this tough time together. A two-pronged approach needs to be taken to coordinate COVID-19 control with economic and social development. We should respond to COVID-19 pandemics with joint efforts and unity of minds to ensure the smooth flow of international trade through digital solutions, promote trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, and maintaining the security and stability of the Asia-Pacific industrial chains and supply chains, and push the Asia-Pacific economy toward recovery and prosperity. To achieve a more balanced and sustainable economic and social development. This year, thanks to participation of all economies concerned, the APEC Pachijaya Vision 2040 has been formulated, which sets out ambitious goals and important guidelines for our future cooperation. This should be taken as a new starting point for us to begin another phase in Asia-Pacific cooperation. Let us move forward closer regional economic integration, sustain the strong momentum of development in our region, and embrace a future of shared prosperity. Together, we can build an Asia-Pacific community with a shared future featuring openness and inclusiveness, innovation-driven growth, greater connectivity, and mutually beneficial cooperation. Step by step, we can surely turn our vision into reality and deliver a better and sustainable life for people in the Asia-Pacific region and even the whole world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, thanks once again for your active participation. On behalf of all the participants, please allow me to express our deep felt thanks to all the staff who prepared for the webinar and provided excellent support, technical support for its smooth operation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Seeger, for the closing remarks. On behalf of the organizers, we would like to express our sincere appreciation and heartfelt gratitude to all of the contributors and participants in making this event a success. Thank you once again, and we look forward to having you at another program in the future, physically, we hope. Let us take another photo now of the speakers in the last session and the session now. Please turn on your cameras, ladies and gentlemen, please, and smile. Thank you so much, everyone. And just a reminder on the slides for the presenters, please share your slides to our manager, Luis Dennis, at luis.dennis@isis.org.my. We will then upload it on our website, and it will be also notified. We will also notify the participants of the links that we have uploaded. And don't forget that tomorrow we will have sessions for the next gen and also the PECC Standing Committee meetings. This will start at 9 o'clock in the morning. So please use the same link that you did for the first day on the 14th. So see you all tomorrow and have a great day. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you.